This conference will now be recorded.
And all, welcome to the Heber City Planning Commission meeting for this day of April 22nd, 2025. Joining us this evening, we have Commissioner Dave Richards. We have Commissioner Derek Sloglowski, yeah, I say it wrong, Greg Royal, and Tori Broughton, myself, Phil Jordan. And at this juncture, we have not seen some of our other commissioners. So Robert McKinley, you want to come on up? We can go ahead and bring you right up. That'd be great. Okay, do I have a volunteer for our Pledge of Allegiance?
Ladies first.
I'll do it.
I'll do it. Dory does.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would any of our commissioners like to offer either a prayer or thought this evening?
I'm always good for a prayer. If I gave you a thought, we'd go too long.
I understand. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for the opportunity we have to meet in such good circumstances and for the good weather which we are enjoying. Father, we pray for Thy Spirit to be upon us this night, that all who come may be able to communicate well, that we may be able to use our ears and listen to others' opinions and ideas and be able to come together as a community to make Heber City a better place. We're grateful for all of the blessings which we enjoy to live in this wonderful community in this free land, and we ask Thee for Thy blessing to continue to be upon us. So we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Dave. Do any of us need to recuse from any agenda items for this evening based upon a potential conflict of interest? Hearing none, we'll move on. I believe our first agenda item is in the consent agenda for the meeting minutes. If you don't mind bringing them up for 1 second. I don't have my agenda with me. Right, there they are. Minutes for March 25th, 2025. If anybody has any edits or changes that are needed? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Great. I have a second. Motion is first and second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, say nay. The ayes have it unanimously. Okay, our first item is a update on affordable housing. I believe we have a gentleman who's with us. If you don't mind, come on forward and sit down, introduce yourself. We're asking that this agenda kept to about 25 minutes if possible, if that's possible. That'd be great.
All right. Is this on? Can you guys hear me okay?
There might need to be a...
Is that better?
Is it on?
Is this better now?
There you go.
Gotcha. Okay. I will do my best and speed through this presentation.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. My name is Jason Glidden. I'm Executive Director of Mountain Lands Community Housing Trust. We provide housing opportunities throughout the Wasatch Back in both Summit and Wasatch County. We do that through a number of ways, through development of affordable housing, through our Housing Resource Center, which helps folks identify housing opportunities in this area. And then last, by advocating and helping to create policy that incentivizes affordable housing. So with that last piece is how we've been working with Heber City for probably almost the last year now to try to work on some policies regarding affordable housing. So one of the first steps that we took was to conduct a survey of some of the larger employers in the area. And so this survey was done last August, I believe. And Tony's going to pull it up here. So really the presentation is to go over those results and talk a little bit about the need for affordable housing in this area, which I'm sure most people don't question that there's a need for affordable housing. So, but it gives us a little bit more data. So as it stated here in August of 2024, we sent out a housing survey to some of the larger employers in the area. That included Wasatch County, the Wasatch School District, Heber City, Midway, and IHC. And received more than 480 responses to that survey, which was great. And I'll show you kind of the results of that in just a second. So, but when we talk about affordable housing, there's a couple of things that we look at of what we're trying to determine when we discuss, whether that be goals or needs. And so, we really need to understand how many affordable units that are in demand. Are we looking at rental units versus ownership units? What AMI, and AMI is area median income, which is really affordability level, should we be targeting? And then what type of units would that constitute? So next slide. When we talk about housing need, there's really three things that go into that. The first is population growth. How much is the area going to grow just through population growth? The second is the number of workforce members that are driving into the area every single day. And then the last one is the number of households that are cost burdened, meaning that they're paying over 30% of their household income on housing. And we would consider that housing burdened. Next slide. When we look at rental versus ownership, everybody would love to be an owner of housing, but not everybody is necessarily in a position to be an owner of affordable housing. So there's a couple of things that are really dictating that. Household income may be too low. They don't have savings to make a down payment to be able to get the financing that they need. And last is really market driven, which is interest rates. And right now we've obviously seen a huge jump in interest rates where they were historically low previously, and that's making it a lot harder for people to afford what the mortgage would actually be for home ownership. And I would say that, when you're looking to provide ownership opportunities, affordable ownership opportunities for folks that are in that lower income levels, there is going to be greater subsidy that's going to be needed for that to happen, whether that be through state, local, federal funds normally. When we look at AMI or affordability should be targeted, we need to really look at the demand that's in the area or the need at those different levels, and then what actual subsidies are available or tools, funding available to help subsidize those different levels. And I apologize, I'm going really fast, so if there's questions, please stop me at any time and ask questions. So when looking
Just going to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. What types of units are we looking at? A lot depends on, are you looking at renters versus owners? There's different needs associated with those two groups. The affordability level, again, comes into play. Household size, are we looking at, families that are, just a couple, or are we looking at families that have, children? And then again, funding sources become a major determinant of what units types you're looking for. So to get in a little bit, we surveyed, like I said, those 5 employers, which are some of the larger employers in town. But I did want to show just a labor breakdown of Wasatch County, because I want to give some perspective that while we did receive a great turnout from some of the larger employers, there's still a lot of the workforce that was not actually surveyed in this survey. And it's just to keep that in mind, because while we did a great job covering government at that 17%, and a majority probably of the education medical services at 12%, that really is only somewhere between a quarter and a third of the actual workforce here in Wasatch County. Next slide, thanks. These are just some of the top employers, and you can see that with our survey we were able to get the school district, the county, Intermountain Health, and then you can see Heber City down there 11. Obviously, Midway is a lot smaller employer, but it was important for us to see what the governmental employees were at. This next slide, and I apologize because these next ones are a little small, but I can go through them a little bit, and it looks at living wage in Wasatch County. And you can see that down below that last row there is minimum wage and what we're actually providing for minimum wage. The next one up from that is the poverty wage. And you can see that they're still pretty close, where minimum wage doesn't even cover the actual poverty wage that is needed in Wasatch County to survive when you have a larger family. And then the top one there is living wage, and you can see the difference between the minimum wage and the living wage here in Wasatch County. Next slide, sorry. Again, this is even smaller, so I apologize, but what this is just further breaks down the costs associated, and it breaks it down by different sectors, whether that be for food or house shelter, transportation, childcare, medical. And really what I wanted to show in this slide is really how much housing and transportation really play a part in that. But as families get larger, childcare becomes a bigger and bigger cost as well. So, but housing is always right up there in the top 3 as far as costs that are associated with living here in Wasatch County. Next slide. So getting into the area median income, AMI, these are numbers that are broken down by county, and they are provided by the federal government, and they update these usually in April, and we just got these back. And so these are the actual most up-to-date numbers for 2025. And as you can see, it's broken down by household across the top there, about number of house members in a household. And then going down, you have the different AMI levels, whether that be at 50, 60, 70, 80, and above. Generally speaking, affordable housing comes in at about 80% AMI or below. That's the general term or general definition that's widely used throughout the industry. I would say that the problem with AMI that I have is that AMI measures the income of the folks that actually live here. It doesn't measure the folks that work here. And so what we like to do is we like to look at workforce wage, and that's done at a state level, and it can be broken down by county as well. And then you can compare that workforce wage against the AMI and get a better idea of maybe what affordability level you should be targeting. So that being said, I would say that, what we saw was a fairly large increase from 24 to 25 of nearly 10%, which is a very large jump. So we're continuing to see these large rises in the area median income for Wasatch County. And why that's important is really that actually can drive rent prices significantly based on this chart here. So. All right, getting into the survey a little bit, responses. I talked about we had 480, but this just breaks it down by the different employers that participated. And you'll see next to it the number, as an example, you'll see Wasatch School District, and you'll see 230 employees submitted responses, and that represented 41% of the actual organization. So going around the board, you can see there that overall we got a really great turnout from these organizations as far as employees participating in the survey. So one thing is that we wanted to understand was, first off is where do they currently live right now? And this was a little bit surprising to me, but we found that 71% of the employees that responded to the survey actually live within the 84032 zip code. And then you can see the remainder, just under 30% that live outside. Why that's important is when you're looking to target folks, you're not necessarily going to be targeting the 71% that are already in town. You're looking to target the folks that are outside of town that are looking or have an interest to come into town. So when we presented this to the city council originally, they said, well, they said the same thing. Why are we worried about the 71%? They're already here. We want to really kind of focus on that 30% that aren't here. So what we did was we went back and dug into that 31%. And what you'll see is some of the results of that. The other thing that we did want to keep in mind is when we are looking at what kind of targets we're looking at, that 71% also has those households that are cost burdened in there, that are actually paying more than 30% of their income, which we want to try to alleviate as well. In addition to that, you actually, as part of that 71%, you have renters that want to become homeowners. So we need to take those folks out of that 71% as well. So, and that's all in this next couple slides here. So looking at the folks that actually live here in 84032, roughly 68% actually own a home here, which is fantastic. That's really great. 32% are renting and have an interest in buying a home in the future. When we look at the AMI levels, and again, this is that income level of the folks that were wanting to buy in 84032. The first one that's on your left there are the ones that are outside of the Heber area. And what you can see is there's a large percentage that are at that 80 to 120% area median income. There's still, it's a good, obviously it decreases a little bit on both sides there, but it was surprising to see that the majority of the folks actually wouldn't necessarily qualify for a lot of affordable housing programs because their income is actually too high to do so. And then to the right there is just the ones that are currently renting. And that one, you'll see that they actually are slightly moving down in the AMI level there, where there's a lot more that would actually qualify below that 80% AMI. Next slide, please. This is just a combination of the two. Again, when you're looking at the definition of affordable housing, I would say that it was surprising that probably the majority, by slight amount, actually made over that 80% AMI. Next slide. When we looked into some of the demographics, this was important when you're thinking about household size, about the unit type that you're trying to create. You look at the average family size when you look at that, and you can see the top two are those two categories broken up, and then the one down below is the one that I kind of like to focus on because that's the combined overall group. That the average family size was 2.65. Average AMI was at 94%, which is pretty high. The average number of cars was just right around 2. When we looked at it originally, that number was much higher with respondents, and so we actually broke out and looked at just the folks that actually own a home here in Heber and found that they average about 4 cars per household. So it's much higher if you own your home already here, that you'd have a lot more vehicles. But the ones that are actually that we believe would be targeting only have 2 vehicles on average. And then the last one there is just the cost burden households. Of this group, 59 of those households were cost burden, meaning that they were over 30%. There were some that were paying over 50% of their household income towards housing. Next slide. I just really quickly, for historical matters, we wanted to go back a little bit. Back in 2016, 2017, there was a housing study done in Wasatch County in coordination with Summit County to look at the need for affordable housing. So it's always good to see where you were a little bit ago, and then now we're going to compare that to where we're going right now. So back in 2016, 2017, the top one there is rental households or need for rentals, and you can see Wasatch County was at about 102, and you can see the breakdown where there was a lot more of a need at that lower AMI levels, and then below that is your household ownership need, and that was about 141. With it pretty even across the board, but majority being in that 60 to 80% AMI. Next slide. So again, when we think about when we're targeting or when we're trying to create targets to create policy to incentivize to hit those targets, we're looking at these areas. So I'm just going to go through and kind of go one by one through these of what we're seeing with the data. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see as far as the amount of affordable units needed, based on the survey and understanding that we're only capturing a small percentage or a quarter to a third of the workforce population, we feel like there's a definite need for about 400 affordable owner-occupied units, meaning that these are ownership units, and then an additional 600 affordable rental units that could be needed right now. Next slide. As far as the breakdown of rental versus ownership, it's pretty easy math. It's 40% ownership and then 60% affordable rental. Next slide. AMIs, this is really based on what we talked about earlier about, as much as everybody would love to have be an owner of a home, not everybody's ready for that. So when you're targeting, you're probably going to be targeting a little bit of the lower AMI for rental housing. And if you can provide them affordable rental housing, that allows them the ability to save and get into a position to actually buy. And that's the idea behind that. Owner occupied, you'd probably be targeting more of that 80 to 120% of the area of median income. Next slide. As far as the unit types for affordable rentals, multifamily apartments is probably the best bet because they're the most efficient and they have the most, when we talked about subsidies before, the most subsidies at a federal level with low-income tax credits that are available to help to build these types of units. And then when you look at owner-occupied, as much as everyone wants a detached single-family home, there is an absolute need for that, and we should be looking at opportunities to do that. Townhomes allow for a lot more units to be built in a smaller area. So we started just to look at possible strategies of ways we could start to incentivize affordable housing here in Wasatch County. Things like fee reductions, impact fees, meaning building permits, sewer, those type of things. Zoning changes, which it comes to you guys. Cash grants, loans from government agencies. Land donations. There's a lot of different partners that have land that could be used for affordable housing. There are other communities that have used tax rebates, so a reduction on whether that be property tax or what have you, to help to make these projects more financially feasible. And then the use of public-private partnerships. And again, this can come in the form of working with private developers, with partnering with whether that be governmental agencies, school districts, whatever you may have, to build affordable housing. Next slide. Obviously, some of the challenges we face in this area: high land costs. We're continuing to see land costs go up. High construction costs. That's only getting worse with the possible threat of tariffs and labor shortages. Zoning is always an issue, to be honest, and it's one of the easiest and cheapest ways for an area to incentivize affordable housing. A lack of coordination. You guys are here in Heber talking about it. They're talking maybe in Midway about it. They're talking at Wasatch County about it. It'd be nice if we could which would allow for more partnership to happen. A lack of funding is obviously, this is always going to be an issue, but there's not a funding source right now, an ongoing funding source to help fund affordable housing. You have the Wasatch County Housing Authority that is in place right now and wants to do great work, has been providing down payment assistance, but they don't have a true ongoing funding source to continue those tools to help folks to get into affordable housing. And the last is then public support, and this is really important, educating the public on the need for affordable housing. A lot of times when you have projects that come before you, there are folks that are going to be outspoken about it, saying, we don't want this, not in our backyard. We want to see no more growth. So it is something that we have to work on to gain that public support. I talked about some of these resources already, but the Wasatch Housing Authority, is a great tool. Fee in lieu has been a very successful tool here in Wasatch County. Fee in lieu is, for those that don't know, is the ability for a developer that has some kind of housing requirement to actually make a payment to whether that be the city or the county to satisfy that requirement. And then the last resource is that there's land. A lot of these folks, Heber City, Wasatch County, the school district, they all have property that could be used towards affordable housing. So that's a great resource that we should be looking towards. I talked about some of these as well, as far as this regional collaboration and these opportunities to partner, shared goals, having shared goals across the county to be working towards, and opportunities to have shared funding. So as far as possible next steps, what was talked at the interlocal meeting was to have the Housing Authority kind of start to discuss how they want to approach maybe forming some kind of subcommittee that would look into these opportunities that we just discussed. So they had a meeting actually last night and are beginning that process. But I know that one of the suggestions was looking at zoning, and Tori was at the interlocal meeting and listened to this presentation before and said, would you mind coming and speaking about affordable housing and how zoning can really play an effect on that. So I'm here to answer questions, or if there's other areas that you want me to dive into, Tori, based on our conversation, I'm happy to do so. But with that, I'll turn it over to you for some discussion.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here and for your work. We understand that you'll be continuing this work. This is not a one-time look at this. We have an action item in front of us this evening that I think is significant in this realm. We've been working on, it's probably the biggest thing we're working on all year long, as far as I know so far. But let me just turn it over to the commissioners to either discuss or ask questions about this specifically right now.
I'd just say that, I've been on the commission for quite some time. This has always been a discussion item. It's kind of amplified over the years. We're have some serious issues as far as a lot of people that come into the valley are what I would call consumers, not producers, which is fine. You know, people that come here to retire or work remotely and not the workers. So as we went through your presentation, the one thing I feel like we can do the most of is really the zoning part of it. You know, everything is good and we can have weeks of discussion on what we're talking about here. So I would say what we need to do is take all the information we have and realize what is our focal point, and that is really how do we help with the zoning part of it. So that's the only thing I would really underline is, especially like you said tonight, we have one of the items that is there, and affordable housing is very subjective. I know people that buy a $2 million house for affordable housing while they build a nicer house. And other people, they work all the jobs and they can't afford. I personally have a son that has waited 4 years and his home is going to cost him $550,000 and they're charging, 250 of that for land. And he's waited 4 years for that. It's pretty hard. So anyways, one thing I didn't see on there is when you said construction costs, there's also the cost, the mortgage cost, which I know FDA has reduced there. So I don't know if I'm sure you have that in there somewhere, but that was just one of the things that kind of jumped out at me. So that's all I would say. I don't want to take too much time to discuss something that we go there and
No,
focus
Dave,
on the action
but
that we can do.
that's exactly why we asked for it to be at the beginning of this meeting. And I'm seeing, are there other movements for there to be action working towards a qualified, say, discounted mortgage for where you're living and where you're working? In other words, there'd be some connection to that to promote that you would be able to afford a cheaper loan by virtue of you working closer to your home.
Yeah, I mean, the self-help program is a great program. There is a long wait list and it's not necessarily cheap. But the nice thing is that is another federal program that does allow for mortgages that cover the entire cost of the home, which doesn't require a down payment, which is nice. Also the seller with that is the interest rate that they're providing. It maxes out at 4.5%, but most of the qualified applicants are actually at 1 to 2%. And it adjusts as your income adjusts. So if your income goes up, then your interest will go up. But if your income goes down, then they'll actually drop the interest rate down on that loan as well. I think, we have to be careful, with prioritization of workforce sometimes, because depending on where your funding source is, there are fair housing that won't allow you to prioritize.
Yeah.
So you have to balance that out a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think that we've just gotten used to building too big. And, we need to build some more smaller homes that are more starter homes that are more affordable, so that we can get down into a more manageable, maybe $350,000. And I know that sounds even crazy to say that, but that it is true that's where we're at, that's the affordability level. Right now, self-help at 550, we participate in self-help as well. We're building, at 450 right now, but that's, we don't have as much as Self-Help Utah does as far as properties. So I look at what your action item is tonight, if I can speak on that just a little bit. And I was really impressed with the thought there of looking at your lots and lot size. As I drive around this area and I get out into these neighborhoods that you're looking at for this overlay, and I see opportunity with they're very big lots where you could actually, split them and put 2 or 3 homes on. And I understand, that provides density, that some people don't like, but what that also does is creates affordability, where that one home might cost $750,000. If you put 3 homes on there and split that cost, then you've dropped that price of that housing down. So there's also opportunities for, ADUs, to help, with affordable rental that could be used to help offset mortgage costs, right? I've had successful programs where we built, townhomes that have ADUs attached to them. The homeowner buys both the townhome and the ADU, rents the ADU to help offset their mortgage costs. So there's different ways of looking at it. But as far as, what's being proposed tonight, from my brief overview of it, I'm very supportive. I think it's the right step in moving forward as far as taking advantage of what you have. There's going to be some bumps in the road, and I love you kind of addressing like stuff like historic homes and how do you deal with that, because that's going to be the difficult part too. And you want to preserve the history and the look and the feel of Heber. So, making that consistent, and you do that with your step down. And from what I've seen, as you get out gradually, you decrease in size and all that stuff, which is completely appropriate in my opinion. So,
Yeah. Coining the phrase "missing middle," as we call it, right? In terms
I'm a
of
big fan of missing middle.
that, you are printing the T-shirts, actually. Yeah. Yes.
This is more a matter of curiosity than it is any zoning issue, but I am curious because I live in the southern part of Heber. There have been a lot of large or apartment complexes that are completed or, in the process of being constructed. And I'm curious as to whether the rent structure on those are of any benefit to the people at the lower end who are really looking for affordable housing but can't get it.
Well, I mean, the general thought, obviously, it would be a general economics of supply and demand, right? The more that you build, hopefully that the price would come down, right? But we have not been seeing that in the state of Utah, unfortunately. We've seen more being built over the last 10 years, and yet prices still continue to rise. So, I think really what we need to look at is the use of deed restrictions to help to keep prices low. But it's the market, and the market will drive that. There's still a demand, and people are willing to not have to drive an hour and a half to get to work and pay more for an apartment, more than what they should be paying. So it's still driving that demand. So you're still seeing a lot of these places being built.
Tori.
I did see this at the interlocal, and other than Jason's very extensive experience in this topic, the thing that really struck me was in the survey, the folks who want to move here, their average household size is 2.6, which is probably on the smaller side for your average family here. And so for me, that just really catalyzed what we're trying to do here. Smaller homes, I think, is something that Heber's missing. And it's also something that people are looking for. So I thought that that in particular, plus the rest of the information would be super helpful for our discussion.
Very good. I think that's it. We good?
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much for
Good, very
coming. We
good.
appreciate it.
Thanks for moving fast.
You're welcome to stay for what will be our review, if you have, but you've seen all the material already, I trust. So, yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to we have many of you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to be certain you knew that a couple of things. First, our agenda item on the specific to the cell antenna is our item number 3, and item number 2 is quite an extensive conversation about the Central Heber Overlay Zone, which I anticipate will be at least 45 minutes to an hour. I wanted to also make sure that we understand that this evening's action specific to the cell tower does not include essentially a public hearing. You're clearly here to express and understand and intend that. I also want to ask, could you clarify, gentlemen, to make sure we understand this application and this agenda item versus another cell tower that has been discussed previously?
Yeah, correct. The city has 2 cell tower applications. One is for the Valley Hills area. That is not being talked about tonight. That will be in May. The discussion that is happening tonight is a continuation of last meeting 2 weeks ago, which is the increase of height in the commercial zones. And that is totally separate from the Valley Hills issue. So
I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that that previous application will have a separate moment in the agenda, and we understand that to be possibly May or even June later. Okay. So just want to make sure you're all here recognizing that that is what's going to happen tonight. That said, I had asked the Planning Commission if you think it would be a good idea for us to move the cell conversation up, considering how many people are here and how much longer the overlay zone is going to take. Would we like to move that agenda up? Robert, say yes. Tori? Yes, and I believe we have.
Yeah, I've got limited time, so I'm happy to do whatever would be the best. So
So be it. Let's move forward with the agenda item relevant to the cell tower height conversation and application. At the appropriate time, I can call for that, but not right now. Thank you. So just a point of what we usually do is we'll go through the staff report. The staff is presenting to us again where we are in the process, what questions we had at the time, and getting responses to questions that we asked previously. And then as we open it up for conversation, I think it would be an appropriate time for you to address the Planning Commission. No worries. It's not open, but I will recognize a couple of questions I think are important and make sure that we've covered it all.
All right, thanks. So just, I'm going to recap because you, Chairman, you're correct. This is an extension of continuation of what we discussed at the public hearing 2 weeks ago. But for the audience, for everyone. So APC is a tower company who is applied for a text amendment with the city. Anybody can apply for a text amendment, citizen, a company, anybody can go through that process to petition whether a code can be changed. And so they're looking at asking for the height of the cell towers in the commercial zones to be increased. So there's some policy questions for the Planning Commission as you consider a recommendation for or against. And that would be, should the city increase the height of cell towers in non-residential areas, so just industrial, commercial? Should the towers be restricted in the downtown? And does the city support the use of stealth poles as it's currently in the agenda or in the code today? So going to a little bit of the background, the city has had a place for a number of years that has cell towers to 35 feet maximum. There are a few in town that predate that ordinance, particularly on the west side. There's one downtown by Chicks, and then there's also another one at the high school. The city adopted that ordinance. As we continue to have more people move into the valley, more growth there, we're being approached by cell tower owners who are being approached by their clients, which would be the AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, those providers, and saying they're having issues or gaps in their service. And they're looking to remedy those gaps and provide additional service as there's increased demand. Initially, APC, when they proposed this amendment, they said that they wanted to go 120 feet tall across the city. Staff, in working with them and also receiving, there was some public comment we saw from the one in Valley Hills that's referenced. We didn't feel that proposal would be really supported by the Planning Commission or the City Council or the citizens. And so we worked with them to come up with something that's a little bit more amenable to prepare for that public hearing. And so what we've done is we've come back and said, look, what the proposal is now, instead of what was originally proposed, is to increase that height in the commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zones. The mixed-use zones have a large commercial component in them. We looked at other cities around us. So Heber City, our height limit is 65 feet. We looked at a couple down in the valley, so that are also experiencing growth. You see Spanish Fork is at 60, Saratoga, it depends on the zone, but they have a maximum of 100. We looked at Harriman, they're 50 to 100. We also looked at who's around us. We looked at Midway and Wasatch County. Midway is 40 to 60, but with a conditional use permit, you could get upwards of 80 feet. And then Wasatch County, which we have had one built just adjacent to the city off of Daniels Road, they're 60 to 100 feet depending on their zoning. So what's been proposed today is to increase the height limit from in the C2, C4, the mixed use residential commercial, and the I1, I2, the business park, and the institutional facility zones, as well as the A2, which is an agricultural property. The only piece of property that's even zoned that would be Muirfield Park. That and the city would be the owner there. So those are the proposals. We're not looking at changing any of the height in any of the residential zones. In addition to that, we've essentially taken what was just a written list and we put it into a table so that the uses were much clearer. You can see that lattice towers and guide towers and most freestanding towers are not permitted anywhere in the city. Certain roof-mounted roof-mounted antennas, not towers, are conditional use permitted in industrial. And wall-mounted stealth antennas are conditional and permitted depending on which zone they're in. In no case are we allowing any of those towers to be built in the C3 going forward. And then there's some co-location of existing, and that has to do with those towers that are in place right now. That means they can change out the antennas. And then in the residential, pretty much everything is not permitted. The only thing that would be the conditional use based on, it has to be government or some sort of land that's non-residential. Now, with that being said, we are not proposing any changes to the locations of where these can be, with one exception. And that exception is, well, two exceptions, sorry. Let me go back up here. The first exception is we are proposing an increase in regulation on them to say that if they're in a commercial zone, the C2 or C3, or any of these other ones, they must use stealth when a conditional use, and they're not permitted within the downtown area. So that's essentially 500 north to 600 south, 600 west to 600 east. They're just not allowed in that area. So that's one new regulation in terms of prohibiting location. The only other change is there's a separation increase. Right now, the code allows for a pole with two poles to have a minimum separation of 2,000 feet. What the proposal is to increase that separation to 1 mile or 5,280 feet. So essentially doubling the distance between the amount of poles. And so we are increasing that. I'm just going to, and we'll go to that code in just a minute. There were some questions about health concerns, and the Planning Commission asked us to look and see what the state, some literature on the state. We found a link. I included that staff report for anybody who wants to look at it. And essentially, it talks about, and it quotes National Cancer Institute, and the state has basically said that there's no consistent evidence for an association between any source of a non-ionizing EMF and cancer has been found. They also made a statement saying that they did not see any reason at this time that the state should add any additional regulation above and beyond what the FCC and the National Health organization has done. So with that, let me jump down to the text amendment, and we've provided a little bit. This is the original presentation here. You can see where that they're saying the green is kind of in building, and that's ultimately what they're trying to do, is get more service in buildings. You can see the different services, but they also provided an additional one. This is an updated coverage map that maybe helped say, here's where we're at and here's where we'd be proposing. So you can see the green is the in building, or in commercial. That's what they want to do. They provide. So you can see there's a lot. Ultimately, the orange is kind of in your vehicle range, and then the purple is you have to be outside to get any sort of reception. So they're saying we've identified this area specific to T-Mobile that there's not coverage. And you can see that with the tower that you would get a considerable increase in coverage and signal. So this is with 120 versus this without any changes. This would be 100 foot without any changes, and then I think they just did the 100 and 120. So essentially, they provided this as well, saying based on the information, and they can go through this, the applicant can, essentially how many more people or how many square miles by adding one tower would be serviced, as well as how the height plays into that. So, but I want to go to, this is the recommended proposal we've clarified the definition of a monopole to remove small wireless facilities because they're a completely separate thing. We have, again, taken a long list and put it into a table. Again, we did not change any of the locations of these outside of nothing within the kind of the historic core of city. And then we clarified some language here that talked about 2 additional. We just said, instead of it being confusing, we're just saying it's 3. That means that they can locate 3 different, they should be able to locate 3 different users on the same pole to minimize the amount of poles that we see. And then in the development standards, we consolidated the monopoles requirements and talked about antenna height. And then we proposed a height by zone rather than just a general height. It would be specific. And again, these are the same ones I went through: commercial, industrial. And then this is that change here. So from 2,000 feet separation to 5,280 or 1 mile. So with that, if there's any questions, we did go through the public process and held a public hearing. We noticed over 800 different property owners within all of the commercial, industrial, mixed-use zones, all those zones where the actual laws changed, just the same as state statute. But with that, we responded to your feedback, particularly on those health issues that you'd asked about. And with that, we're here to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Jamie. Could you roll back to the last, where you actually have the dimensions on that last page?
The dimensions or the height?
Heights, yeah.
Yep.
What's currently permitted in C2, C3 is 35 feet.
Correct.
That would move to 100 feet in your
Potentially,
proposal.
yes.
Okay.
If the council adopts this as proposed, it would go up to 100 feet, correct.
The applicant wanted it 120 feet across the board. And
Initially, that would be their ultimate desire, but they understand that there's
I understand.
some discussion there, yep. Let me go to those heights real quick. There you go.
That's what I was looking for. And remind us of the county's obligations or height restrictions.
Sure. That one was, I believe it was 60 to 100.
6100, right?
Mhm.
Regardless of zone, right?
I believe it was depending a little bit on zone, but
Okay,
100 in
Yeah.
some zones, 60 in others.
okay. Good enough. Is our applicant here tonight?
yes.
Great.
Good point.
Would you like to come forward and please introduce yourself?
My name is Larson Quick. I'm with Rage Development and APC Towers.
Thanks. Does the planning commission wish to have any questions right now?
My question, we received a lot of letters.
Say again?
We received a lot of letters, from citizens, but there was one letter that came from the applicant's attorney.
We received a ton of stuff at 4:00 this afternoon.
Yeah.
so-
This was a couple days, 1 or 2 days ago, we received a letter from the attorney of the applicant. Is that not right? The one that we received?
That's correct. That was included in the packet. And essentially what that is he's just restating the FCC and the federal regulations and positions on the questions relating to health.
So what I want to do is, do we have, from the city attorney, do we have a recap, or have they been able to share with us what that letter really means from the city attorney? That was my biggest concern, is that we received the letter through the staff, but I didn't see anything. I mean, none of us should step in as the legal representative for the city. It should be the attorney. So help us understand where we're at here.
It's a bad idea to play attorney.
Well, we're not going to do that.
There you go. Any idea, Jamie, what our attorney would say or not say at this point? Not his
So-
opinion, but when will he be or will he be looking at that?
So I can send it to him. He has not reviewed that one as of yet. But everything that I've seen in terms of pertaining to health and the Cancer Institute, national, and what the states put out and everything is pretty consistent in that the health regulation. This question also came up, I believe, with the other cell tower, and so I
Yep.
know there was some discussion on that.
Right in the middle of a residential zone.
Sure. With our attorney, and my understanding is it's all fairly in line with the same FCC order. So, but I'm happy to get him to opine on that.
Sure, I
No,
understand.
I'm just saying, for me, in the process of trying to give a recommendation what we're going to do, I would really like to have what the attorneys read it as on that before I would feel comfortable in one direction or the other. That's, I'm just saying, that was my opinion, so.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Do you have any other questions or comments, David?
I don't.
Okay, Derek, do you have anything?
I know we've split up the heights, different zones. We're staying out of residential zones. I've always felt that less towers is preferable, and I'd rather see the height than more towers.
Yeah.
But I know that that's my opinion, and not everyone agrees with it. But I'd rather see, 3 or 4 tall towers than infilling all over the place with small towers. But that's just me.
So the current limit is 3,000 feet between towers? And have we done them,
2,000 feet.
is it 2,000? I thought it was 3,200 and something, but, okay.
Currently, it's 2,000 feet, linear feet between. What proposed is 5,280, or 1
I understand.
mile. Yep.
Have we looked at the map to see just how many towers are possible with the current?
I have not done
Ordinance.
that analysis, but ultimately, by increasing that by more than double, you've essentially eliminated half of the potential.
Yeah, clearly, if we've made it so that you cannot put another tower within a mile of another tower, we're going to have less towers.
Yeah, it's more than less because you're going in all directions. This is not just one way that it's 2,000
Right.
feet. And
It's
yeah,
all
and so-
directions.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I'm kind of with where Derek was at. When we first looked at this, we're like, we could have less towers. Felt like that was a little bit, how big is the city as far as, our,
Miles. I
what's
looked it
that?
up. 9 square miles.
9 square miles.
And if you eliminate residential zones, yeah, we're talking 3 towers, 4 towers.
Yeah. So that was just the way that we were looking at it in the beginning. Obviously we looked at it that way in that initial meeting that we had for the other tower, which, we're kind of, blending them here a little bit, but we looked at that and then boy, we get this tidal wave of no one wants cell towers anymore. It's like, so I don't know. We got to figure out, what is the medium here? That's why it's so important for me to see what the legal, letter was to us that, are we doing something that's really wrong here when we're just trying to separate things out farther?
Well, how tall does the tower have to be to get 2,000 feet of coverage?
2,000 feet of coverage?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not entirely sure to answer that.
Well, like currently, we're saying we can get 2,000, they can be 2,000 feet apart.
With 35-foot height.
That's 35 feet will get,
But, 35 feet will barely probably do that. It's almost useless, to be honest with you. 35 feet, yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Greg, do you have any questions?
I agree with Dave about listening to what the attorneys have to say about with that letter coming in.
Okay. Robert?
I have a couple of questions. Under the way the ordinance is written, as we change it, does a cell tower company have the ability to take any of the shorter towers and unilaterally increase them, or do they need to come back here and ask for permission to do that?
So there are no 35-foot towers in the city.
Whatever they are.
What's that?
If they're less than 100 feet, the 60-foot tower, for example, can they come in and make it 100 feet, or do they need to come back before the commission?
So they can increase it, but they would have to come back for a site plan. They would have to come back for an approval for telecommunications permit, but it would be just an administrative. I can tell you that as far as I'm aware, we do not have any cell towers in the city that are less than 100 feet.
Okay.
All the existing ones are at that point. Like I said, we haven't had a new cell tower for quite some time.
All right. And then my other question is, if a cell tower is going to be put in a commercial or industrial area, what is the minimum distance it can be from a residential lot line?
So again, we didn't change that, and I believe that is 115% of the height of the building, or of the tower. So if it's a 100-foot tower, it would be a minimum of 115 feet. of separation
Thank you.
from any adjoining residential use zone.
Our conjecture was it had to do with the cell tower falling down.
Generally speaking, sometimes that's where that comes from, is if there was ever a situation like that, then yeah, it would be, yeah, we did talk about increasing that. That is something you can do if you want. We talked about going upwards of 150%. So then that would put the separation at 150 feet if you're doing a 100-foot cell tower.
Okay.
That's within your purview to make that recommendation to change if you'd like.
One of my concerns is how far away from a residential lot line does it need to be to lessen the impact of it on that person's view that they've had for many, many years, and maybe a reason why they bought their house in the first place.
That would depend on a very individualized basis, because the individual person's view, but depending on topography, could change a lot. But I couldn't give you just an answer saying it's this. It's not a set number. So
I once had an expert witness tell me that it didn't matter how close the house was to a landfill. Nobody minded living next to a landfill, and that's kind of, I think, where we are with this cell tower thing.
Remind me, Jamie, but I believe that the requirement for stealth technology has been removed in the text amendment. Is that correct?
no, it's still there. The applicant has requested that for consideration of that stealth technology being removed from the ordinance. The current proposed ordinance maintains that requirement.
Is it required or is it conditional?
It's required.
So the planning commission could consider an adaptation to that you're not recommended, or is there a reason why staff hasn't recommended? Because
Planning Commission has the ability to make modifications to the proposed ordinance. So if there's something you want to modify, that's
well, last
within your
meeting
purview.
we had some, I believe your applicant actually provided us some indications of what the stealth technology looks like in this 100-plus tower height. And suffice to say, it ends up looking worse as a stealth technology than it does. That looks just frickin'
And I think
weird.
we would anticipate that there would be more branches than what's on there in use of that stealth technology.
So Dave, what do you think of that? Okay. All right. Tori, do you have any
Stands out
questions?
more.
As we're going through here, any questions or comments?
Do you know how many cell towers Midway has?
I do not. The only one I'm familiar with is the monopine that's right next to what used to be Ridley's, but the grocery there. That's the only one I'm aware of. I've not looked at how many they have.
I read 60 to 80 feet is permitted in the commercial zone only. Is that right?
Conditional use, you can get up to 80 feet, correct?
In Midway,
Correct.
but not in residential area. Or is that
It's
not
still
clear?
higher, it's 60 plus in all areas, up to 80 with
Let's go
conditional.
back to the chart here because I want to double check.
So Midway allows essentially 25 feet higher than,
Midway is 40 to 60 and then up to 80 with a variance, which is kind of like a conditional use. But they're all conditional uses and they're permitted in all zones.
thanks, Dave. Sorry, we do not recognize any public comment or question at this time. Not at this time. Sorry.
So in all zones is what Midway has, from what I found. It's allowed in all zones. It's a conditional use in all zones, sorry. And it's 40 to 60, up to 80 with a variance.
It's higher than what we have currently here.
Correct. We are the lowest in the valley, and then we are much lower than other cities from I looked at Utah County and Salt Lake County, again, more of these newer cities and what they're doing, and they're experiencing growth as well.
Okay. Very good. Tori, anything else?
I don't have any questions, no.
Yes, Robert.
If this ordinance would be passed as it's currently written, what would be the process for somebody that wanted to put in a cell tower of 100 feet? What would they need to do? Would Would there be an application where they would have to come back before the plan commission and there would be an opportunity for a public hearing at that point?
So they do have to file an application. There's not a public hearing requirement because it's an administrative item. The city has public hearings for legislative items, which is what we're talking about tonight, meaning we're looking at making a modification to a law. And administrative is just, is checking the box. Does it meet the requirements of the law? So it's not a public hearing, but it would be a public meeting.
What change would we need to make if we wanted it to be something other than an administrative hearing so that a public hearing would actually be required?
So that would be a recommendation to modify the proposed amendment.
In what way?
You could just say, we want to include, so right now, let me explain the process and then that'll help with this. We have a telecommunications permit. They would essentially file for that, and a site plan. They would have to come to the planning commission as part of a conditional use permit, depending on where they're at. But ultimately, they do have to come for the site plan. They usually run together if it's a conditional use permit. In that process, what you're saying is you would want to include a public hearing for the site plan or for the telecommunications permit. That would, at the planning commission, ultimately that's what you would want to include. But if you give us direction on that, we can include that, we can fix that. That's pretty simple.
So Robert, if I'm listening well, your intention in that question or potential edit is that anybody who's forward with this height what would make it conditional?
Well, my concern is I would like an opportunity for anybody that feels like they're affected by this thing to have an opportunity to come and speak against it and give their reasons for it.
Okay.
I would certainly want that opportunity if one was being put in within 120 feet of my backyard.
The only thing I would say is we just have to make sure we're very careful, is because in the state of Utah and the way land use is, when we have a public hearing and we do that, those reasons against it have to be based and founded in the administrative code and ordinance, meaning there has to be some sort of evidence that says it does not meet the code. If it meets all the parameters of the code and there's a comment that it's not my preference, in an administrative item, that is not something you can withhold an approval on. It has to be somebody opposing something. It has to be founded in the ordinance, some sort of evidence that they did not meet the provisions of the ordinance.
Or that the planning commission or others would petition to change the ordinance.
Right.
Yeah, you could. Well, if they've applied, state code says
grandfathered in.
the day that they apply, they're locked into the code. So if the planning commission wants to
Right.
make a change, we can do that going forward, but we couldn't on
Right.
whoever's coming before.
Right, there would be a call for that being grandfathered prior to that.
We want the ability to do that on every application that wants 100 feet. We would have to basically not say that 100 feet is permittable in any of our zones without a conditional use permit.
Well, and that's
We
the
would
way
want to
it's-
write it into the ordinance so that it does have to come through. Because if you just allow 100 feet in a particular zone and they meet those requirements,
You must allow it.
then we must allow it.
essentially, well, at the same time though, even though it's a conditional use, and you got to be very careful here. A conditional use does not mean that you can say no just because you don't want it. A
Right.
conditional use is saying it's permitted. In fact, the state property rights ombudsman would love us to get away from this and just say it's permitted with these extra conditions, because that is essentially what a conditional use permit is. And so here's the limitation. So a monopole, if it's conditioned, it's you must use stealth and you can't be between in the lot and block area. If they meet those two requirements of those conditions and anything else in the conditional use code in chapter 108, you have to approve it. You cannot use a conditional use like a semi-legislative action.
A block, yeah.
But we could add conditions, like it needs to be further away from the property line
Sure,
or
you can
something like
you
that.
can do any of those things. Like I said, the separation that's 115 feet, if you guys want to propose something that's more like 150 or 200, whatever it is that you feel that is to meet what you're feeling is mitigating those issues, let us know now. We can put that in. So
But those have to be predetermined. That's not on a case-by-case
correct.
basis.
Correct.
Correct.
And that's the case with all conditional uses in the state of Utah.
Okay. So I believe the general public here tonight may have questions. We're not opening this up for comments. So if there are any questions that have not been addressed, we'd be willing to try to answer them now. So if you have a question, not a comment, a question, then please come forward and ask the question. And please tell us who you are. Right there. Yeah.
Lori Gagan. So I do have a question. I would like to say a comment to Jamie because I think he's wrong on there's no history on harm. So the question one that I have, I don't think this gentleman knew, you can go to cellmapper.net and you can map out all of the cell phone or the cell towers. That does not include the small cell towers that when you raise, when you're raising something from 35 feet to 100 feet, everybody's and their mother wants to then attach a device to it that's going to extend a signal. And then just to correct it, the higher up you go in 5G and 6G, the shorter the attention, the more repeaters you need, the more cell towers you need. But so the comment that I have is if you're trying to raise from 35 to 100 feet, how do we as citizens know what is going to be stuck on the additional 65 feet? Because the FCC, and Robert F. Kennedy is trying to change this right now, has not updated their wireless exposure for 25 years. And there is a major lawsuit. I'd be happy to provide that after. There's a major lawsuit because 25 years ago, we didn't have as many cell towers. We didn't have 5G, possibly 6G. So the harm that is being done, and I like to say the innocent victims who are our children and my grandchildren and whoever else has grandchildren. So the question is, you want to raise the tower in these commercial places, but it's also going to affect the citizens who are living around. And it doesn't sound like anybody has done anything to know the frequency of raising to 100 feet. What is the damage that it's going to do to the people in the community, the children in the community, our innocent victims? We already have cell towers on top of schools. These kids sit in it for 7 hours a day. We look at the health crisis we have right now with a 300% increase in ADD alone, where we're putting our children and our grandchildren in these buildings. And then all of a sudden we're going to raise it 65 feet. What else is going to attach it? We know it. Look down, drive down towards down 40 and take a look at that tower that is over by Marcella. There's not just one cell tower there. There are probably 25. Well, what the heck is it doing? And I don't think by listening to anyone in here that anybody has brought up that we're going to raise it 100 feet, but we're not going to attach 25 more devices that are going to harm the citizens. So
That's your question.
That's the question. And then just the comment, you could go to cellmapper.net. There's 144 cell towers in Heber. 4G towers cover 1.5 miles, which is about 8,000 feet. 5G averages 1,000 feet, which is smaller, per tower. So that works out to be about 8 5G towers for the same coverage as one 4G tower today. So you do the math, that's 72 5G ugly towers. And look at the growth in the valley. I don't think any of us, we love looking at the trees and the mountains, but we don't particularly like looking at the cell phone towers. So that is my question. My comment is I really honestly think it needs to be brought up to public comment for the citizens of Wasatch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't believe or are we able to respond to the question about what will also be attached to these towers besides the cell technology?
So I think the applicant would be the best to probably talk about what would be attached. Typically, what we see are the antennas of usually up to around 3 different cell providers. So you may see one for each of the major carriers. That's usually what we see. And then there's usually some sort of equipment on the ground that helps to provide backup power as well as regular just power.
So no other equipment besides the cell technology
I
equipment?
would have to,
Yeah, that would, our business is to deal with cell antenna providers, right? So T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. It would just be their antennas, just like you would see anywhere else. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so questions only. I'll allow, let's say 2 more. Jamie, do you want to come forward? Question only, no comment. And 1 more, and that'll be it. Thank you.
So I just had a question for Jamie. I was under the impression that Heber City is 28 square miles. Can you verify whether it's 9 miles or 28? I think Tori may have been a little
I want to
misguided.
say, this is a rough, just because I don't have the data right in front of me, I want to say it is roughly 16 square miles. Sounds about right?
Yeah, I think it's more like 28. And then my other question is, so why are we doing, so Tori's saying there's only 3 towers that are even possible, so why are we doing a blanket code? Is it legislative or administrative?
This is legislative.
This is legislative.
Correct.
So what were you talking about administrative?
So the question that was proposed by the chair or by one of the council, or sorry, commissioners is, can we do he wants to explore doing a public hearing on an administrative application for a new pole. That was what we were talking about. So this is legislative, meaning we held a public hearing, and this is the time to have a public hearing. There's a conversation about whether you should have a public hearing on administrative. If you do that, any arguments against it in an administrative setting has to be founded in code. Legislative, you can just say, I do not like this and I'm opposed to it. That's appropriate. The power to take that sort of comment in an administrative action. Administrative is applying the law that's in place. So this is about changing that law. So if someone wants to say, which we did hear some that said, I don't want this, that's fine. That's an appropriate comment. To say that in an administrative setting, you can say it, but it's not something that they're still bound by what the code says.
By the code.
So that's just the difference.
But you're changing the code in a legislative fashion.
Correct. That's
Okay.
That's appropriate.
So why are we doing a blanket code if this guy just wants 1 tower in Heber, Daniel area? Why are we doing a blanket code? Why aren't we just talking about this 1 tower? Why would we do a blanket code we'll beg to differ on these 2 points, but I'm saying 28 square miles. You're saying 15, Tori's saying 9.
You know how far 28 square miles is?
Heber City.
So again, I'm happy to email you the official answer to that one on how big it
Well,
is.
I already know it, but I'm just wondering, why aren't we just doing for this 1 cell tower, why are we doing a blanket code in the 28 square miles?
Yeah.
Or, sorry, 15. 9.
Let's just say that the question is, why are we not holding a public hearing on 1 site versus doing a citywide amendment, right? So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can modify the code or modify the regulations that govern a piece of property. One is usually you do a text amendment, because if it's something that the city feels is appropriate, that's applicable to everybody, then that's usually what you do, is you change the language to say this is good for everybody within this zone. If you have an instance where the city says it makes sense here, but we don't want to do this everywhere, you can do what's called a development agreement, which is what's proposed in the residential neighborhood on a different site. The applicant is the one who said, we want to propose a text amendment. We went to the council. The council, just to say, here's the options. There's council even willing to hear this. And they said, we're willing to at least hear this. And they understand that 35 is an issue. What they're saying is, they've said, okay, we get that 35 is a concern from actually providing that. And so anyways, in this process, which I think in most cases, a text amendment is more appropriate because from a regulatory standpoint, it's very predictable. Meaning most people can look up the code, you can see it, you can see all the regulations. And in the development agreement, you can still look that up, you can still get a copy of it from the city, but that also now it has certain regulations that are different than everyone else in that same zone. And so it's really about trying to make the same modification to every zone. And so it's one of those things where if it's appropriate in all commercial places, then it should be allowed in all commercial. If it's inappropriate in commercial locations, then it shouldn't be allowed in all commercial locations. And then you can, if you really want to, get into the one-offs. But that's the idea behind the text amendment, which is generally how most cities amend their code, is through a text amendment. The development agreement has been something that's been more utilized in the more recent.
But the text amendment is legislative or administrative.
They're both a
They're
development
both
agreement.
legislative.
If it's changing any sort of regulation on the property, whether it's a text amendment or a development agreement, they're both legislative.
They're both legislative.
Yep. A development agreement is essentially just like a zone change on a single piece of property, but done through essentially the agreement, not changing the zone or changing the text. So it's kind
If
of,
we're talking about 3 towers, why wouldn't we just do a, like, per individual tower? Why would we do a blanket code across 15 square miles?
well, because it's more in my opinion, it's definitely more transparent to say, this is in the code and it's applicable to this zone. It's usually easier to find. And so we don't know where those would go in the future, but we are saying if this is something that the city feels is good for the public, which is what this whole conversation's about, if it's good for the public and it's good for this zone, then it should be allowed in the whole zone. So that's for the council to decide whether it is or it isn't. They've taken the feedback. Planning Commission's giving a recommendation either for or against. I don't know which way they're going.
And then
But
how
that's
many,
what this process is all about.
how many emails did you get saying that they were, that it wasn't for the good of the public?
I don't have the exact count.
It's like 170,
It
100,
wasn't that high. It wasn't 170.
120.
So
Asked and answered. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jamie. I thought we have at least one more question. Okay, we're gonna, since you all are here, we're committed to hearing from you. We did not essentially open or schedule this for a public hearing. I want to be very clear. It's not that we don't want to hear from you, but we did not formally invite the public to come. So we're now actually disservice to the public of having a formal meeting without announcing it as a formal hearing. So I want to respect the fact that you're here. We need to hear from you. If it's a question, we'll allow it, but we need to call this, let's say, in another 15 minutes. Yes.
I just have 2 questions. Oh, Christopher Grange.
Hey, Christopher.
Hello. If we have taller towers, because these are 2 competitive companies between, I'm going to say Tower 1 and Daniels and Tower 2, would eliminate the need for the tower over at Wasatch View? That's question 1. Question 2, why a pine tree? If you actually look it up,
Yeah.
they can do a gorgeous clock tower. They can do all sorts of other things that look a lot better than a fake Christmas tree. Those are the 2 questions. Think about it. That's
Okay, let's answer the first question. Can you answer that question?
Sure what the other, can you say your first question one more time?
it's a smaller tower in a residential area where you guys were talking about larger coverage.
I think I can answer this one.
All right.
Okay.
So let me jump to this map that was provided. Okay, so this would be worst case scenario, 120 feet. That's not what is proposed, but this is worst case scenario. You can
That's 20
see-
feet higher than what we're proposing.
Correct. Okay. So the green and the improvement in the yellow, this is what you can see the difference in where that radius is going to present or where it's going to increase service. They're still hitting the outdoor, meaning you have to be outside, out of a car, something like that, right around Center Street. So because that doesn't quite reach the Center Street, the other tower is trying to do the same thing. This tower would not eliminate the need for the other one based on the maps that they're proposing in terms of showing what that coverage increase would be.
All righty. Thank you.
And so the second question.
Oh, yeah.
Remind me-
I kind of already
Like
knew,
Christmas tree.
sorry, I already kind of knew that it's possible. I was just putting it out there as a thought to think about.
Sure.
Because everybody sees the pine trees, thinks Heber City and other cities that nobody's going to notice it. I think would all really prefer to look at a clock tower than a fake pine tree.
So I'll answer part of that, and I think the applicant can probably answer another part. The city ordinance does require stealth. The city ordinance does not define it as the monopine. We are open to any of those options. I think the challenge with a tower, some of the towers I've seen, I know which one, I've seen some that you're talking about, those are usually built into, say, a building or something of that nature. And then on this property, there's not a development there that could be incorporated into. There are things like a water tower, but water tower, I think, is generally not seen too much in Utah because we tend to have tanks or ponds or something else. In fact, our tanks are like the one in Valley Hills or other areas, they're recessed in the ground. So we don't really see those like you would say in the Midwest or other places in the country. And in some of those instances, you may even see that someone just attaches to one of those. But I think that's where it comes back to what can they do that's essentially monopole, but how can they disguise it? And I think it comes back to that leaves us more with like pine tree or the palm tree or some of those other ones that may just don't fit the region. But so I think could we do some of those other ones? Yes, I think some of those probably just given the timing and where it's at and lack of development on the property in terms of having a building to incorporate a clock tower in, that would just be my initial thoughts.
There's also some limitations on how many carriers you can fit on one structure if it's a clock tower. It's much easier to get, let's say, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T on one structure if it's a monopole or a monopine. If you're using a water tank, clock tower, et cetera, the logistics of fitting all of those antennas and all that equipment in at different heights is quite difficult. And that's really where it comes down to, is we're trying to get one structure that can have as many carriers on it as possible to reduce the need for additional structures.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to allow two more questions. You, sir, and then you, sir.
Cell antennas from other cell providers, yes.
That's correct.
That was part of my question with.
Sorry, your name, sir?
Yes, excuse me. TJ Stevens. I'm an attorney at Hogan Lee Hutchinson, about a block over at the old Afterword building. I have a question with regards to the clusters. So if you, for example, if you look at the cell tower that I look out from my window by Chicks, it has one cluster on top. And I know that the city, at least in the code, is requiring co-location. So to where we can fit 3 providers like you just said. And so my question is, for the additional providers, cell providers, is it within that same cluster, or would we be looking at 3 separate clusters?
They would need their own height on the tower.
Okay, and approximately how much height for each
We
cluster?
allocate 15 feet per provider. Antennas average 8 to 10 feet in height.
Okay, and so you're looking at about probably 45 feet on a 100-foot pole or whatever, if you
Yeah,
had
give or
3
take.
service providers.
Sure.
Okay. One of the things I had a question about too is the location. If we did have 35-foot towers, which require a conditional use permit in residential zones, are we going to be faced with a cluster of 3 towers within one area? For example, let's just talk about the Valley Hills. We have a requirement in the code now that they have to be a mile apart. Are we ever going to be looking at a situation where we have 3 35-foot towers right next to each other in the same parcel?
So I'll answer that. The current code is a 2,000-foot separation. The proposal is to increase that separation up to 1 mile, so the 5,280. So the way the code is written today, without any changes, the answer is no, with the exception of what's existing on 600 West and essentially 100 or Center Street. Or is it 100 North? Anyways, just over here about a few blocks. Those preceded a lot of our ordinances on cell towers, and there was a cluster of 4 towers. They're all 100 feet tall. My understanding, based on the public comment we received 2 weeks ago was that one of those had been removed. So. with
Sorry, this
current-
is on 600 West?
600 West, correct. With the code, the answer is no. You're not going to have a cluster of towers on the same parcel because we would not allow that currently or with the proposed amendment.
Okay. And then I did go through the proposed amendment and the changes. And in one of the changes you're requiring that you noted, it goes from, instead of 2 additional providers for each monopole, just a total of 3.
Yeah,
So
that's kind of weird language.
There's going to be a little bit of conflict if you allow a 35-foot monopole in a residential area. It cannot accommodate 3 providers. Otherwise, it would be going, right?
No, it could not. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That is something that I noticed in the code, that there is going to be some sort of conflict. We would stick with the height on that. What I think the intent on that was to encourage co-location. What we were trying to fix at this point is the language of 2 additional, meaning that there's at least a minimum of 3, just to say 3. But I think we could massage that language, we could alter that language so that it would include something to say that this would not require or permit something taller than what the zone would permit. Is that your concern? I think
Yes.
that's something that definitely the planning commission or city council can add.
I don't want any provider to come in and say, well, the code's requiring us to have it
3
fit
versus
3. And then, so in order to do that, we need a higher tower.
Yeah.
And
I think that
so
makes
that's my
sense.
concern. And the other thing is, maybe just for clarification for everyone, example of Atlas Tower. When they came in, they did the application, it was 35 feet. If they do a development agreement and they get higher than that, how much confidence can the citizens of Heber City have that in residential zones, we're not going to see any towers above 35 feet?
So here's what I can say, and that would be based on the way this is written, whether the existing code or the proposed, because there are no changes in the residential ones, you would not see something like that unless in the residential zones, unless you receive some sort of, if it's a development agreement, you would get notices. All those who live within 300 feet are going to get a notice. If it's a text amendment, right now that we would generally put a notice out that says in this zone, this is being changed. And so what I can say is that, and I got to see where the council is going to go on that particular issue, which again is coming back to them. It's still ways from going to the council. Like any code, council has the ability, that legislative ability to make changes if they feel like it's in the interest of the public. So you would at least get some sort of notification saying, hey, there's a development agreement being proposed. You're going to get noticed in that area. Text amendment, we do noticing as well. So with that, it does come down ultimately to your elected officials as to what codes are adopted or amended. So I can't guarantee that couldn't be changed in the future, but I would say you would get notified.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Very good, thank you. We have one more question that I'm going to allow, yes?
My name is Gary Bradley.
Hi, Gary.
This will be short and sweet.
Thank you.
We live in an age of incredible technology and artificial intelligence, and my question is, has the city council and even the manufacturers and corporate folks considered entering data into an AI format and seeking a long-term vision of where is the optimal location of each tower so that it provides the most efficiency for the company doing it, it provides the best service for the local people, and it minimizes all the negatives that go with towers in the middle of residential communities. And AI is incredible short. Even an idiot like me can get a pretty impressive report out of an AI system that would give me a vision of here's the best locations over the next 5 or 10 years that will do the least damage and do the most good for those trying to do it. And it will have the most credibility rather than a bunch of us who aren't technology experts trying to evaluate what's the best decisions. So my question is, have you considered getting one of your 6-year-old techies to do an AI search and input the data from the companies and the data from the communities and see what it comes back with? You only need 4, and here's where they ought to go. Consider that, please. Thank you.
I think I understand your question. Is there a response to that question?
So, yeah, I can respond to some extent. The city has not done that. I don't think the city hasn't explored that at this time, and I don't know if there's any other cities who have. It's an interesting question. Generally, a lot of that happens by the carriers. Their engineers are constantly looking at where they need that coverage. However, the second half of that question is the public side, in the sense of the city saying, we've kind of ran the numbers, here's where we think poles could happen, and here's where they could be located. Generally, the way the city operates is, as well as how these poles come to fruition, is that the tower company or the provider, they start negotiating with individual property owners. So if there was a situation where you had a property owner who maybe was in one of those prime locations, was unwilling, that tower company's got to go look somewhere else. And so generally, the city looks at what and where from kind of more of a zoning, creating zones, as opposed to pinpointing specific properties and saying, you can go on this property, this property, this property. We have not gone to that point. I don't know any cities that have. Again, we would, if we did something of that nature, and again, you had property owners who were unwilling, there would be we would still be facing a situation where cell towers, companies, and providers would be saying, these don't work for us, we need something. And so we would continue to have an ongoing conversation. So again, that we haven't explored it. It's an interesting idea. We generally try not to get into the middle of the private negotiations between the property owner and the cell tower company. That's between them. So that's generally the way we've done that.
Okay. Well, commissioners, do you have any other questions at this point or comments? Thank you, everybody, for being here, and appreciate all that. I think it's time for us to call. We've had quite a bit of activity on this. We've had the public meeting and hearing on it. I'd like to see if anybody has a motion.
I have another comment.
Okay.
As far as having a 35-foot pole with 3 carriers on it, I don't think there's much risk of that, simply because no carrier is going to want to be on the bottom of that pole. It's not going to do them any good. So I do agree that we should have something written into our text amendment that protects the city from someone coming back saying, hey, I don't have enough height to put me on here, but I seriously doubt that anyone will ever want the bottom part of those poles.
We can easily incorporate that.
Thank you. So we have had conversation tonight that actually talks about modifying the text amendment. Do we need to have you modify that text amendment before we move it forward? Or are you clear on what changes we're talking about?
So as long as you include them in your motion, whatever that motion is, then we're good. The concern about the 35 versus the 3 users, that's pretty easy to modify. We'll include something along the lines of saying that this provision does not permit or allow that height to go up because of that. So essentially, those other providers would not be required to add those other providers. So we can easily do that one. The only one that's right now is unclear to me is, and this would be, as long as you include this in your motion, is there's a question on the setback. Again, right now it's 115 feet. And then the other is whether or not you guys want
115%.
Sorry, thank you, 115%. Or whether or not the planning commission wants to hold a public hearing with each administrative permit for a cell tower. Those are the only two that I'm not clear on, but as long as it's whatever you want to include is in your motion, and there's
Understand.
or a motion by the body, we can include that.
So is there an advantage to having all of them come before us if we can't indeed say no?
So the application will come before you. The question is whether you do a public hearing and noticing of a public hearing.
Right, but
For
I'm just
that
saying,
issue.
we have a public hearing, we're giving the public maybe hope that we can deny this or say no to it. If we can't, why are we doing that? Why have the public hearing? Why make people think that we can say no?
That's a great question, great conversation. That was part of the conversation the city had a few years ago when they decided to remove those public hearings from all administrative items because of that understanding.
Right, right. So it comes down to, what do we want in the ordinance? Do we want to allow 100 feet? And if we're gonna allow it, we need to stand by it and allow it in the zones that we put into the ordinance. Because it should be administrative at that point.
Is there a world where we would recommend to the council that they would consider those applications non-administrative, rather that they would trigger a development agreement?
I don't think we could do that. I don't think, my understanding of state code is they would prohibit us from creating any sort of requirement that would force a legislative action with every application. That would be some. state
It would be,
not
it would be
appreciate that.
contingent, it would be triggered by a request of a cell tower height, is the point.
So here's what
Say
you do.
above 80 feet.
So if you want to do that, then you set your limit at 80 feet, and anybody who wants to ask for that has to do a development agreement, which is a public hearing, noticing of all the adjacent property owners.
And can be denied.
Yeah, you can if they're asked, because what you're saying is we're going to set the land use law, the law to say 80 feet. Somebody wants higher than that, then they're asking for that law to be changed. That's legislative. That's very much a public hearing requirement. But to say, oh, if you want a cell tower, you have to do a development agreement, that would be that would be inconsistent with state
No, I'm
code.
saying that the condition that would trigger it would be a height requirement above and beyond.
Yeah, essentially, you would just say, this is the height requirement, and then anybody else.
Then we would just simply change the text amendment from 100 feet down to 80.
I would just say, what you need to do is, so there's a few options here. One would be just say, this is what we're comfortable with. This is what we feel is appropriate for the public. Here's what our height limit is. Then, and if anybody wants something, they can always request that. They can always request another text amendment. Everybody has the right to do that.
Okay.
If you wanted to set something to say anything above a certain height requires a public hearing as part of the conditional use permit, you can do that as well. But again, it comes back to, do they still meet the code? So that's the issue. But to say anything above this is legislative, you just set the code at what it is administrative. Anything outside of that would just by default be legislative.
Okay. One last question, I guess, for me is, how did you come to the 100 feet for the C2, C3? Is that because of the nature of having 3 carriers and 15 feet between them?
Yeah, so the applicants were asking for 120. We looked
Understand.
at, again, who's kind of around us. We looked at everything else, and we essentially said, hey, I don't think 120 is. Our feedback to the applicant was 120 is probably a little taller than I think where the planning commission and city council, my guess, is going to be. And so what we said is, where's the range again? So they're saying if we can't get 120, they would like 100. Now, does the planning commission say, well, we feel like 80 is appropriate? That's your call. That's your purview as a recommending body on this legislative item. So if you don't feel like 100 feet is that number, change it.
And midway is 60 to 80, as I understand it.
Yeah, 40 to 60, 80 with a variance.
Got it.
But if we do go lower, it probably means more towers.
Unless we keep the requirement of 5,000 feet.
Again,
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis. I have a question.
Dennis Gunn?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Dennis Gunn, nice to hear from you. I didn't realize you were with us tonight. Thank you.
Sorry, I am. I apologize. I came in a little bit late, but I'm online.
Very good.
is pretty simple. I appreciate the discussion. My question is, around the airport, there are certain elevations that we have to manage for via the FAA. This is for staff, have we taken that into account, make sure that those areas are, we're not gonna have a tower sticking up into that area that's protected by the FAA?
So anything that's within a certain radius of the FAA has to go through an FAA process for
Correct.
notification of intent to construct, notice of beginning construction, and then they have to do an as-built. So there's like a 3, and then at that point, the FAA can step in and say no. And the FAA has way more authority than we do. And so what we've done is we said, look, we would make them go through that same process, and if the FAA said this is a direct conflict, then the FAA would overrule the city, and they would have to abide by any of those FAA regulations. So if we have a 100-foot cell tower, and the FAA saying, we can't do that here, maximum on this location is 50 feet, they have to abide by the FAA regulations.
Correct. Okay. I just want to make sure if we were, I'd taken that into account, 'cause sometimes that kind of stuff can get overlooked. I just want to make sure it wasn't overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Since you're here, I think we're going to be asking you to consider you're now present and part of this assembly and voting. If that's okay with you. Appreciate it. Okay, so do we have a motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a question before you go to that. Did you ask me to vote or not vote?
I believe it's permitted if we have a position to allow them to vote. You're present in the planning commission, you're a planning commissioner, so we can ask you to vote.
Okay.
Yes, hold on a second. Could I ask for quiet, please, in this room? Is it coming through the?
Coming to the mic.
There we go. Okay.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable with coming up with a motion now that would include specific directions that we want the staff to go through and deal with. I'd be a lot more comfortable.
So that would be a motion to continue with direction?
To continue it, and my rationale is, these are some issues that really need to be thought through as to how it's got to be drafted in order for it to be effective and enforceable. And I'd be a lot more comfortable seeing what comes after this process that we go through and coming up with that alternate stuff than trying to do it off the top of our head today.
Okay, so that means and I was sort of checking in on that for a minute here, Robert. Was my question to Jamie. You've heard what he considers to be the text amendment changes he has to track. What was not clear for you in that?
Coming up with a mechanism that will allow for a true public input and hearing.
On a per occasion basis?
Yes. To allow those people that are going to be affected by it to come in and have some say in the matter.
Jamie, how would you respond to that if given direction from the Planning Commission that that's what we would want?
So I would look for, first of all, I would ask to know if the entire Planning Commission, or at least the majority of the Planning Commission, agrees with this.
Let's assume for a moment that that's the case.
Then I would want to know how you want that to be implemented. Are you saying it's just across the board we're doing a public hearing? Is it a public hearing triggered by something, whether it's a certain height? What do you want to trigger that public hearing? As long as I know that you want it and what triggers it, that's pretty clear.
But I think our conversation tonight was also the fact that we could have a public hearing that would go nowhere on the basis that there would be no ability for us to deny something of a certain.
That's a very real possibility.
Because of the nature of how our systems work. So having heard that, Robert, are you continuing your interest of having?
I'm still bothered by the fact that there's not going to be public input. And that's why I'm saying that I think we need some time to really cogitate on this and see if there is a way that we can come up with it. If we can't, we can't. But I certainly, I am not able to articulate off the top of my head what that direction should be right now.
Well, typically it's been specifically in my understanding, and I'm just a citizen, so I'm somewhat illiterate most of the time when it comes to this, but I would just put it out there that if it's essentially a conditional use, they must meet conditions in order for that to occur. If it's broad in those conditions and it has the applicant actually meets all those conditions, then it has to be allowed, right? So I think the question that we heard Derek ask earlier was, false expectations can be equally destructive to the extent that if people have the right to land and the right to business by law, they petition within their understanding of the law, then they have the right to proceed. With a construct, we have the ability for us to petition or to listen, so long as what we're seeing has actually been identified as conditional. And if they're within those conditions, though, they have the legal right to proceed. So people express their opinions, but not necessarily get any resolution on the basis that it's already been allowed. So what we need to do is go back to the text amendment and look at what would be minimum in this case, right, is my understanding. So then after that, they would have to petition to go above it.
So if we made no change whatsoever in it, that's what they would have to do, right?
If we make no changes today, anybody who wants a taller tower would have to either apply for a development agreement or, again, petition to change the code. Those would be the two ways to do that.
And the applicants petition to change the code.
Correct.
They'd have to change the code every single time.
That's what
Or you would have multiple development agreements on every individual site.
multiple,
Or you'd have like one development agreement for each individual site. So you'd be going through this process for every individual tower. So it's however, it's your prerogative. I think the first question is, does the planning commission, I would just ask you all, as a body, do you feel like, yes, you want to have the public hearing? If you do, that's fine. If you want, then say, okay, what triggers that? Is it just a blanket, any new cell tower, like monopole, or is it anything above a certain height that requires it? What is the trigger? So those are the two things that I would just need in order to make that amendment.
regardless of the height.
Let me say it.
Yeah, well, that kind of depends.
That would be a change. Because right now, we have a code that allows cell towers within certain realms, right? Certain distances and certain heights.
Correct.
What if we,
Go ahead, Derek.
what if we change it to anywhere we've decided it's 100 feet? Let's say we change it to 80 feet with the option to go to 100 with a public hearing and a conditional use permit or something like that.
So you can do that. We would just need to know what those additional conditions are so that we can easily say, if the only other condition is just a public hearing, just know that you're basically saying the conditions are the same, whether it's 35 or 80 or 100. The only difference is we're going to put out a notification. If you're going to have if you want anything above that or any additional requirements, you just need to help us understand what those should be.
Would it be too restrictive to significantly increase the distance from the property line of any residential area?
I think that depends on how far you're asking them, like what that ratio is. So is it too restrictive to increase that? No. Is it too restrictive to say it has to be 1 mile from a residential zone? That's probably because of the fact that now you're kind of getting to the point of where saying it's not even going to
I would
reach.
agree with that extreme.
Yeah. I'm just trying to say where that balance is. I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis again. Sorry to chime in here, but I do have one question I'd love to ask.
Sure.
While we're debating this, my question is, what is the desired outcome of moving and having a public hearing available at that point? What is the desired outcome of that? Is there a benefit to the public, and is there a benefit to the process to have a public hearing? What would we be expecting to because really ultimately what I think the thing at this point would be is, are we looking for an approval or a denial? What would be the benefit to the process to open that up to a public hearing at that point, or versus putting the text in the wording right now, and that if it's over 100 feet, then these are the conditions. then if you want to be over 100 feet, then you have to check this box, and check this box, or it comes back to the planning commission at 100 feet to be discussed to determine that. That's what I'm asking is what is the benefit to pushing a public hearing at that point?
Well, it may just be my personal opinion, but my feeling is that anytime you get the public involved, it's a benefit. They need an opportunity to be heard. They need an opportunity to express any opposition or support that they have in any manner. And what we definitely don't want to create is situations where the public feels like they're not a part of the process. And this is one area in which we can include the public, I think, fairly easily.
Right, and I fully agree with that. And as I have always been a proponent of the public involvement. My question is, I guess because there's a discussion right now trying to determine what we're going to do with this and if there's a benefit to it or whatever, and if we want to have public input. I'm wondering if there's a benefit to the process to have the public come in, or are the public going to come in and oppose it? And are they going to oppose everything that is done? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, is there a benefit to the process by doing that? That's my question.
So before us is this question of the public hearing, Robert, thank you. And I'm understanding from staff that we need to understand the trigger for that public hearing to occur. And then what I'm also understanding is for that to be realistic and really truly responsible of the public's time and attention and caring, is there needs to be a causal action that could occur from the deciding body who's hearing the public hearing, as opposed to just vetting people being upset and angry.
So that's the thing, is that that's my comment is, what I'm hearing is that the public comment, basically what we're saying is the condition is that the public agrees or disagrees, and legally we can't do that. So if the condition is the public comes in and either says yes or no and they're the decider, that's not legal. So I think what Derek and Jamie and Dennis are trying to say is, if that's not legal, then we either need to set the parameters now that wouldn't allow something that the public isn't going to allow, or that's what we're here to do. So we need to decide what.
Or there would be a call for an exception that would therefore come in as an application for a separate agreement that would be viewed by not just the planning commission, but also the elected body, which is the city council.
Right, and that contingency
And that would
can't
be the
be that the
exception
public
process
agrees.
for that to occur. And there would be a public hearing involved in that process. Yeah.
feel like
So
we're-
Robert, we're not trying to beat you up. We're trying to make it. Okay. Derek, go
getting
ahead.
the
I understand what I'm saying makes it more difficult.
No, but I think what we're trying to say is there is a process for public to be involved when a condition is triggered. Otherwise, everybody will come to the table and will have an opinion. And to what Tori's saying, that doesn't provide for us to actually legally proceed with governing the rights of the people to actually be able to work on their own property.
Well, I think we need to use the public input we're getting now and 2 weeks ago to craft the ordinance. That's the way to do it. And then the new ordinance then takes over from here on out.
Right.
And in theory, it's not
Administrative.
needed anymore, the public comment,
Right,
because
and
we've
that-
already taken
'cause
it
we've
into.
already done it.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And the next time we would need public input is the next time we have to change this ordinance.
Right.
So I think it just comes down to crafting the ordinance in a way that we feel is best for the public and for technology moving forward and all the.
And allow for there to be a process by which those exceptions are actually heard, but also possibly denied.
And is legal.
And legally denied. Yeah. Dennis Gunn, did you have any other comment or question that you wanted to make at this time?
No, I think you guys have handled it quite well.
No, I hope so.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Very good. So I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay.
I'm looking at you.
I know you are. All right. So I'll make a motion here, and I'll just tell you what, the conditions are, right? So I make a motion to drop the height down to 80 feet, keep the 5,000 feet, the mile distance, keep the setback at 115%, and keep that in the commercial zones.
Jamie, is that any other distinct change that you need to make to that you understand that motion?
Do you want a second?
Sorry, thank you. We need a second in order to discuss it.
Second.
We have a second for that motion. Now we can have discussion.
Mine's a clarifying question.
Yep.
So I heard 80 feet, reduction to 80 feet, 1 mile separation. We maintain the 115 feet, so there's no changes there, or 115%, sorry. But then you said in the commercial zones, and so I wanted to clarify, the 80 feet is modifying the C2, C4 zones only, and you're allowing the 100 in the I1 and I2? Or are you saying that anything that's listed 100 right now is coming down to 80?
Everything listed at 100 now coming down to 80. So 80 feet across the board.
I2, I1, C4, C3. Sorry, C2, C4.
I think that's a good compromise from the input we had last week, the input we've had tonight. I mean, like everybody says, we have to allow business, right? And I think this is a compromise that can suit everybody. And I just think it will work for all of us.
So would you be open to a friendly, even I am the chair, I think I'm not supposed to do this, but I would ask if you'd be open to a friendly amendment to that. That would be that we condition this to the future understanding of how cell technology is affecting us in general as humans, and that we would look carefully at how the technology is actually proven to be an issue. And we understand that there are federal regulations regarding that. But I think we need to be open to the fact that this specific issue, in terms of the number of poles and where they are, specifically proximate to residential zones, will be under review on a consistent basis by staff based upon additional input related to public health.
I agree with that.
But we can only do what the FCC says, correct? And if the FCC has more information, then the FCC that would come down, right?
So if the FCC creates an order or does some sort of regulation, yes, we're generally or typically bound by that unless they give us the wiggle room, which they usually don't. But they say, here's the rules you have to live with. And then the state usually comes out and says, here's the rules you have to live with, right? So, and here's a great example. We talked small wireless facilities a couple years ago. The FCC, federal government, came out and said, we have to permit small wireless facilities in basically to be located within anywhere citywide. We have the right within to say, here's what the design can be, here's what some of those things can be. So essentially they said, look, if there's a light pole outside your house, they can put a small wireless facility. What is a small wireless facility? That is either like a Wi-Fi or a 5G antenna. So 5G could be outside your house if you have a light pole. We are required by federal law to permit that. State law came out with something immediately after that and said, we're gonna ditto that, gave us some additional leverage to say, here's how that architecturally looks and where that cost and stuff comes to. And so we had to go through this whole process a few years ago to say, here's what the city standards are in terms of aesthetics, but we have to allow that. So again, we can usually, when there's a big shift or change in something of that nature, we get told about it. We can try to keep tabs, but to consistently keep tabs would be a lot. I'm not saying it's not a lot of work, but what I mean by it's one of those things where we could continue to watch with not a lot of change. And generally, when those sweeping changes come, we get notified of them pretty quick. So I'm not too worried about the monitoring side of that. It's really, we'll hear about it. That's kind of where I would be on that.
Very well. We've had a motion. We've had a second. We've had conversation, discussion. All in favor of the motion, please recognize by saying aye.
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 Aye. Anybody opposed, say nay. Unanimous decision. I just want to say thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you for the continued public input to this. You can see that this work is not as easy as it sometimes seems. I would hope our applicant is feeling that something's been achieved to help them, and I certainly think that we've thanked staff for a significant amount of work on this project. I'd like to take a biological break for 5 minutes. Thank you.
That sounded right. I think it's a good compromise.
It works. It matches what Midway's doing. It works.
That's what I was just thinking.
And
It works.
we would end up, but I wasn't
And you know what? The applicants come in
Had to be
and they go high because they know we're going to bring them down. There's some built-in, they have some built-in. The applicant comes in and asks for the moon. They know they're going to get knocked down a few
They can
pegs.
still put 2 towers on they can put 2 companies on that one.
I'm not too worried about it because it's going to turn out to be, it's going to all turn out to be satellite driven anyway. And we won't even need these dumb towers anymore.
We just bought 250 satellite phones.
T-Mobile's making a deal.
This conference is no longer being recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, that was a great result.
I left
So,
that 9 miles
yeah, it
up
was.
forever.
I completely appreciate what you said. I really do.
Good job.
But
That was
there's
my way of getting it down to 80.
Is your way of what?
Getting it down to 80 from 100.
no, but as soon as we saw him
Tell her now.
80, you knew we were going to go to 80. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're convening on our next agenda item. I believe we're going to be kicking off with a staff report. And I believe at this juncture with this subject, we're going to be walking through the actual overlay zone document. And tonight we have Mr. Jansen with us. Thank you, John. I've also asked a guest for us this evening to join us is our Wasatch County Building Department manager official, as it were. So I've asked him to feel comfortable to answer questions from our perspective about the county, and perhaps when he felt otherwise would like to make a comment. We've also got our subject matter expert on affordable housing. I feel that also would be important. These are not public officials as much, or not members of the public as much as they have duties within and around our local government. So with that, we do have an action this evening for this, so let's proceed.
Chairman, if we could have John Jansen come up. And John, I'll control the PowerPoint if you want to kind of do the.
I think just the
commentary.
staff report should cover the whole thing, I think, right? Because we're really diving into the nitty gritty tonight. There is a section, trying to think where that is. Yeah, it's further down, sorry.
Of this staff report?
No, in the staff report that has all the changes made since our last get together.
Yeah.
And that might be just good to touch on, and then we'll jump into the individual.
Then we'll be looking for these in the amendment when we're
Yep.
for the document.
Okay, so we updated the townhouse section. This may have been confusing, but in the central neighborhoods, you could have a project, but it only have 5 units. You're not going to have 5 units here, 5 units there, 5 units over there, just 5. For the transition corridor, you could have a complex of 5 attached units, several different buildings, okay? Does that make sense? No? So, sorry. You always making these comments. Anyway.
We will not accept any additional side ad lib comments from the public.
Okay.
I want to be very clear. So we'll ask somebody to leave this space if that's the case. Thank you.
Okay. So, again, up to 5 in the central neighborhoods, more than that, but the buildings themselves will only have 5 attached units, okay, in the transition corridor. Next one is that chart we worked on last time. I think we ought to just walk through that, make sure everybody's okay with it. We did take out commercial daycare in the central neighborhoods. We put the double deep flag lots back in, okay. Mansion homes not in the central neighborhoods. Flag lots, detached ADUs, and the SDU, again, is our subordinate dwelling unit idea, which is a detached separate lot that can be accessed just by a permanent access easement. Okay, and that's in there. Want to make sure that everybody was clear that the design standards that we're going to look at make those smaller. All of those are smaller than the standard kind of heights we have for buildings and sizes. Okay. We talked about the height a couple times. We heard 25 feet. We didn't hear anything about 100. Oh, sorry. There's just a slight bit of humor there. I can't help myself sometimes. Anyway, if you want to do townhouses, I think you got to go to 35. Okay. And again, if you recall in the R2 and R3, it's 40 feet. is the height. Okay. And then we talked about some general requirements for public works, fire. I think there's one more in there, and we put that into a general kind of a section. Okay, so it covers all of them, just to make sure that we're getting those clear on everything. So let's move on. Let's go to the chart.
John, could I just make a request as we're moving through this is, particularly with the CND is parking specifically. And Tony, we had a conversation about what may or may not be allowed parking in those streets by the current city code, and asking about, one of the comments we had in the public hearing was related to the onset of having 12 cars when you have, say, 5 families or 4 families in one dwelling. So I believe you led me to understand that, you know, in the transition zone, that would be difficult, but in the CND zone, it would be a conversation we could have about parking ordinances, specifically maybe overnight permit or some way to be able to promote parking available for residents only on street.
That's an earful, and I'm not sure how to respond to that. Sorry.
I don't blame you. I guess my request is that we just talk about parking when we're getting along the way, that's all.
Okay. And
Because that's an expressed concern of the public in all of this, so.
There are a couple minor parking pieces in this, but really that's in the parking chapter, okay, which is different. And if I could answer a piece of that question, which was parking in the front yard, other than the driveway, that's not something we're allowing.
Yeah, no, I meant to be essentially the public street.
On the street, on the public street, yeah.
You know, my takeaway from last discussion, the comment that we had from the gentleman over on Second West and Center, really is if there are, the city has current parking ordinances, both applicable to the street and the right-of-way and to property. And it sounded to me like there's probably some violations to that. And the city is not always able to see those. And so the key takeaway is if there's an issue and it's bugging you, you don't need to drive by it every day and look at it and stew about it. Either talk to your neighbor or call code enforcement. That's why we have code enforcement. And I think in that neighborhood, it sounds like I would hope that that gentleman that had that complaint would consider calling code enforcement on that. Because if people, you know, the easy ones, no parking on the lawn. No junk vehicles that are unregistered. Those are easy things to do. It's a little more difficult when you get into the issue of, hey, I have a family of mom and dad and 14 kids, and all 14 kids are between the ages of 16 and 23, and every one of them has a car. That's a challenge.
Yes, okay.
Another issue too, snow plowing. We do have rules on that. You're not supposed to park on the street during snow plowing.
During the winter.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Tony, quick question. If somebody wants to call code enforcement, is that an anonymous complaint? Or will the neighbor know that the neighbor next door complained?
Many times it's challenging to keep it anonymous, just by the nature of the complaint. You can ask. I don't know what the current policy is, but you can. That's a question people could ask when they call our police department is, hey, can this be anonymous? And at that point, if they don't like the answer, the complainant can just say, well, never mind.
It is anonymous, believe me. My neighbor calls the cops on me all the time, and they never tell me who it is, but I know who it is.
All right. It's really the next chart that I wanted to look at, which is the one we spent most of the time on last time. So just looking at that again, you can see the courtyard is out of there. Small lots permitted in the central neighborhoods, not so much in the transition area. Flag lots in both, subordinates in both, detached and internal accessory dwelling units. Internal, obviously, already 100% allowed, and you all have been allowing detached. So they're permitted in both. Townhouses, so again, maybe struggled a little bit with the language on this, but in the central neighborhoods, they just have to be smaller, 5 units max kind of a thing. So they're both permitted there. And then the complexes are just in the transition corridor. Mansion-style apartments, we dropped out of the central neighborhoods and put them as conditional in the transition corridor. Can I say that's without a public hearing? And I'm just going to say that, okay? And then I'm also going to say, hey, if anybody's going to Logan for the APA conference, we're doing an hour on conditional uses. So just a plug for the conference. Anyway, duplexes. We ended up going with conditional for both of those. Twin homes permitted. It was the ownership idea versus the rental. Commercial buildings, obviously in the TCD, and mixed use in the TCD. I think that reflects what we talked about.
The only addition was that mansion style, I think, was conditional to our future conversation of historic.
Well, I crossed that out because you've let that go for a minute. And when we come back to that, that may be an amendment that needs to happen here. Or you don't really need to have it, actually. Once you adopt that other one, it would say what was okay. Yeah, so. Yeah.
Duplexes and twin homes were combined before, now they're separate?
Yes.
Okay. And so are we doing, on duplexes, we're doing owner occupied, or is that a conditional use, or how's that working?
We are not doing owner occupied on the duplex, but we can get into those conditions in the text as we go down through this. For the twins, I don't recall that we put that in there either. Only one where we're really forcing the owner occupied is the subordinate dwelling unit. The idea there is that you're gonna have a smaller lot, a smaller house. This is one of the few opportunities for actual ownership of a less expensive home.
I thought we kind of talked about in a duplex having one side of it.
I think we may have been aspirational in that conversation.
Yeah.
Essentially, you almost would then have a owner-occupied home with an accessory apartment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we do on the ADUs, which are not up on that, well, they are on that list, but with those, it is owner occupied in one of the units, right?
In the ADUs?
Yeah. So if it's internal, one of the 2 units in the house has to be the owner lives there. If it's a detached one, the owner could live in the detached and rent out the original home. But an owner has to be there. It's
Yes, was our concern that there'd be one owner of a duplex and they would just rent out both sides of it?
how would that work? Owner,
Tough one.
Say that again.
If somebody buys it and as an investment, then they just rent it out all the time and there's no one on the premises making sure it looks nice anymore.
right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah, and what makes it different from the ADU?
So, I mean, that is one of the arguments against duplexes,
I-
all right? Simple.
I would like to get to the specifics of duplexes and see if
Okay.
that would change anything
Okay.
once we start looking at
So we
setbacks.
go down through and under the special standards, you see this whole section in red that is the Public Works, Public Utility Easements discussion, Fire Department, and then we just really wanted to make sure in that number 6 there that everybody understands if you have a private right-of-way, whatever utilities are in there, that's not the city's responsibility. Okay? Even though we'll get the call no matter what. So, small lots, you have that in here, which again allows for a smaller lot than what the zone allows. 3,500 square feet, which again could create affordable units, potentially. I know there's a conversation at the state about having 5,000 square feet as a standard minimum out there for all communities. So that, if you only have 10,000, 12,000 square foot zones in your community, you sometime would have also a 5,000 zone, which is interesting. The state is saying a lot of these lot sizes are too big to be affordable. So we'll see where that goes, if that happens even. So,
Interesting.
yeah. Flag lots, again, in what's in red is just going back to you could have 2 lots deep there. I don't have that graphic in there, just wasn't sure how many graphics you wanted in here, but.
The more the merrier. I'm okay with them.
Okay.
On
Maybe,
the
I
red
think
line.
I may have added it down below now that I think about it. Sorry. Tony, take a look.
Here.
Oh, there it is. There it is. So, and I know the fire department was very concerned about pavement widths, et cetera, for those. That's in there based on conversations we had a while ago with the fire department folks. So, any thoughts on the flag lots?
On item number 1, I'm just
Okay.
wondering if that's worded right.
Up to 2?
Would it be up to 2 lots behind the existing home on a flag lot versus up to 2 flag lots?
They're actually separate flags.
Oh, like the second one now
Let's
has
look
a
at that
flag?
drawing for a
Are
second.
we not sharing the same access, or?
You can barely see the lot line that's in between. They are sharing the access, yes, but there are 2 different lots back there sharing that flag, that pole, that driveway.
So
Yeah.
1 pole, 2 lots.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought we talked about having 2 lots behind the original home.
That's what that
I thought there
is.
was an opportunity for a second access, though.
If people wanted to have a second access, I don't think we would stop them. But most people aren't going to have the room for a 40-foot wide swath of 2 separate driveways.
Yeah.
So can we make
Flag lot.
flag lots conditional in the C and D on the condition being deed restriction?
We could add the deed restriction, make that easier. I mean, part of this conversation about conditional versus permitted is how much processing do you want to have for an applicant trying to do something that might be affordable? Now, I don't really think flags are all that affordable. If you want them to have an incentive to do that, honestly, having a conditional use hearing or even a meeting is just another step that slows everything down and is not an incentive for them. But you could still do that.
So, Tori, what would be your concern by making it conditional or benefit?
Well, I think that the reason why flag lots aren't affordable is because they're not deed restricted. And also, didn't we just say that the other dwellings would be subordinate to the main?
Yes, smaller than the main.
Maybe conditional maybe I'm not using the right avenue here, but I think this would be a great opportunity to add deed restrictions to these smaller lots.
Now, do you mean owner occupied or affordable or?
Yeah, either affordable, I mean, I don't know if it's a blanket decision for all of them, but works in Wasatch County, or the majority of their income comes from Wasatch County, or they can't make more than 7% when they sell it, or what have you. So that it doesn't turn into a bunch of investment properties.
Probably the easiest that I would recommend is the affordable part is something that has to be a voluntary negotiation between the city and a property owner or developer. The city can't just mandate, hey, that has to be affordable. So we would have to do a negotiation. So if your concern really, it sounds like, is, hey, let's make them owner occupied, which the city can do. And so I would say if John disagrees, why don't we put that it needs to be owner occupied?
But there is some, and I'm not an attorney, I've said that a few times, some theory that if you're giving something to an applicant, then you can ask something of them also. I feel like that's potentially shaky ground that's probably good until somebody sues the city.
I was going to say, I was just saying to Robert, from my experience, private sector goes back to public saying, what are you doing in my business? Whoever came up with this dollar figure
Well,
requirement.
the affordable one, I think Tony's 100% right. That's just a negotiation, especially where you're only talking about one unit or two.
So the
But
flag lot.
for ownership, I'm also hearing that the state may have a new state law next year that says, yep, you can do that anytime you want. So, but for now, I think we still can do it. And we're doing it for the SDUs for sure.
Okay, yeah.
I think we've had people here that have commented on the flag lot, and they have an older house, have land behind it. They want to split it into a couple lots for children or relatives or whatever. They're doing that using these smaller lots to make it more affordable. And also, but if somebody has a lot like that and they want to rent the property behind them, it's helping them let the land that they already own make some money for them so that they can afford to stay here. So I don't know that you want to make it owner occupied necessarily if someone's using it as additional income when they retire.
That's what you talked about 2 weeks ago, right? Was the exact same thing that Derek just talked about. So, I mean,
That's fair. I just don't want to miss an opportunity to put these in when we can.
It could be. That'd be one way to try to get at this. But also, I hope you all realize that tracking that is a fairly onerous responsibility also. Somebody has to see what happens when it changes hands, right?
Can we have comment from Jason?
Sure. Why don't you come forward and sit down, Jason? Sit here.
Well, I don't want to make a habit of being up here, but I just wanted to chime in just a little bit. That, one way that we've seen this idea of the balance is to either make it owner occupied or a long-term rental. And you set the parameter of what a long-term rental would be, which mean a minimum of a year lease or whatever that was, to provide that flexibility to allow for rentals, but it still accomplishes in a sense what you're trying to get, which is the long-term occupancy of the property. So, and we have seen other places that have put deed restrictions, requirements on these things as well. You're not wrong. It could be challenged at a state level at some point, but it isn't, according to my knowledge, it's not against the law to request that. You're providing an incentive, right? They don't need to take advantage of the incentive. The incentive is there for them if they want it, but in exchange for that, we want a community benefit out of it, which is a deed restriction or an owner-occupied restriction that would be put on the property. So,
Yeah, maybe the long-term rental is the most flexible.
I think long-term rental seems more reasonable in terms of getting both the worlds, but also keeping it market ready. So then when there is a change in the family, there isn't like a real problem with them putting anybody else in there. Okay.
So
I think that's a
what would
great
be
conversation.
the time period that you'd be talking about there? Long term.
I think that's up to, the policymakers.
What have you heard?
It can go anywhere from 6 months to a year is usually, it's either 6 months or a year. Most commonly it's a year. But I would
To me,
say
that's not
in
a long-term
community like
rental.
this,
That's not long-term.
But you're avoiding the STR, the short-term rental stuff.
it is avoiding the possible,
Airbnbs.
even, they're getting around that with 3-month rentals, right? And they're not there for 2 months, right? So that's why the 6 month is usually the minimum that we see.
Interesting.
Generally, it's a 12-month, and generally, once you have a 12
think
month,
12 months,
as long as they're a good renter, they're going to stay.
I would think that 12-month might actually do everything we're asking.
Wrote
Okay.
that down.
Good
For flag
conversation.
lots, so 12-month minimum stay for any
If
rental?
it's rented, right? I mean, it may be owned. period.
If rented, then 1 year minimum. And as far as implement, policing that.
Yeah.
Throw it back to the HOA, sorry.
Okay. Let's head down again. Sorry. So again, we have the smaller lots. We talked about that. Flag lots, we got some issues, ownership being one of them. I hope it's clear that you can have the two, and that's generally how that works. Okay, and when you get the two, the driveway is wider, okay? I just want to make sure that's clear. And there's a turnaround required if you're beyond 150 feet, so. Anyway, subordinate dwelling unit, again, a new idea coming to Utah. Seems to be pretty popular at the moment as one of the few potentially affordable options for ownership, okay? Yes, maybe a flag lot. Yes, maybe a townhouse. But this one, if you're really doing subordinate, which is smaller house, smaller lot, that adds up to having the potential for affordability. Okay, so we have a series of things kind of similar to the flag, but you do have this one provision of you could have a permanent access easement to this, okay? Meaning in a side yard, you get enough room to walk back into that place, okay? And that's different, very different, but it does create more options, I think, for some of these lots that are out there. One off-street parking, there's the parking question for this one anyway. And that has to be up front there somewhere if they don't end up with a driveway of some sort. Like on a corner lot, you might see one of these happen and it's just gonna have a driveway, right? So, okay. Fair number of conditions there, standards there. Think it through, but again, we heard from people in our open house, and I've heard this same thing up in Ogden where we're talking about doing the same thing. They just don't want people being able to peer into their backyard, sort of a thing, right? And interfere with that. It's fine for my neighbor to do that, but I don't really want them being able to look in my yard all the time. So smaller house, smaller lot. That's the idea. Okay, thinking about that one.
Question on number 4, does the building code have kind of a minimum square footage?
Room sizes has specific room square footage, like bedroom has got to be a minimum 7 by 7. So that's what will determine. There's not a minimum size of a house, but square footage is based on size of rooms.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to point out that we have a 300 square foot
That'd be pretty small
footprint, and tiny homes actually are smaller than that. So the reason I bring this up is just if the city wanted to entertain a true tiny home, we probably wouldn't want to have the 300 square foot limit there and just fall back upon what building code says, which
The
is
IRC, the state of Utah has adopted Appendix Q of the IRC. It is regulated by, does tiny homes, regulates tiny homes.
So would the Appendix Q allow a size less than 300 square feet?
I'd have to look at it.
Okay.
We don't see that many of them, so I haven't dove into it. I just know that's been adopted by the state.
I think a lot of the twins are about 200. Yeah, and some of them are trying to avoid the building code by being under 200, I think, right? Yeah.
So I just kind of bring that up if you want to really promote a true tiny home, that might be something to think about there.
I don't think we need to have a minimum or.
No, I agree. I think
Why
we need to
limit?
have,
Why limit that? I don't see the point.
I think we just need to prohibit short-term rental.
And there's probably other codes and other municipalities that handle that for us anyway.
So no minimum.
We had two
and-
people comment that way. Is there a third?
I
Or
agree. I don't
okay,
think
so
we should have
three.
a minimum.
I guess we have four to pass anything, right? So is there, we got a fourth person on the commission that feels that way about eliminating that minimum?
What are your concerns?
I just want to make sure that we have consensus. I don't want to like take notes and say that we have consensus when we only have two commissioners who feel that way and the other five feel opposite. So
We
does that
usually
make
express
sense?
our opinions.
I think we're all good with that.
Okay.
And I wrote down the 6-month to a year rental situation too. But actually on these, I take it back. These ones, we're talking home ownership period,
That's right.
Yeah,
This is
sorry.
what I was, the only one that
I
actually
forgot.
has,
Yep.
this is owner occupied.
Sorry, I'm crossing that out. Okay.
So Tony, I would agree that I don't think a minimum is needed unless we think that there's an outstanding chance that somebody would build something smaller than we want to see there.
Well, I think this is an opportunity for us to try to promote affordability and, you know, the more we try to add a minimum size to stuff, the more we push that price point up. I mean, if somebody had a great idea that was $20,000 and they were 299 square feet, I think that's just frustrating affordability, especially if we have Appendix Q that we can fall back on that maybe would allow a really small house, but at least it would address the public safety concerns that really we should have.
Yeah, and I think adding with the owner occupied, you're much less likely to have somebody trying to rent out a tough shed.
Right.
Right. I think they're going to build it as big as they can. Okay, so we agreed to delete.
That's in the residential code, right? IRC?
Yeah, it's in the IRC, International Residential Code.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Want to go to the next one?
Sure.
Okay. So here's the duplexes and the twin homes together in this section, but a little bit more red stuff at the end here. So generally, we're looking at some concerns there in terms of design, but the state doesn't really want us to get us into very much here either, okay? Tony and I like the garages on the outside. We've had a conversation about garages on the inside might make better neighbors. And the part of my question, I think it's still in the staff report somewhere, is do you want to bother with the garages outside or just not worry about it? And I'll tell you, most of the duplexes I see, they don't have garages.
I was going to say.
Yeah. We actually tried to look around for,
They're not garages.
yeah,
And
they might have a carport,
makes
but
them
that
more
might be it.
affordable not to have garages.
Yep, sure. Yeah. So the garage thing could be a conversation, yay, nay. Just not worry about it,
I don't
not
think we should
require.
stipulate where the garages are if they have them.
I'm hearing.
Yeah, so this does say if garages are proposed. So you don't have to, right?
A, not required, and B, we don't care where they go.
Well, and if you don't care, then we'll fix this part.
Tony, why do you care?
Why do I care?
What's the benefit of you?
Well, so if you want my opinion, I would actually require the garage to be in the back. Well, if you're going to have them, I would also require them to be separated. So one of the issues is that having the garages separated is it allows the home to have the driveway separated, so there's more on-street parking. There's a case that could be made for walkability and having small driveways as opposed to massive wide driveways of 40 feet wide.
As long as they don't park across the
Yeah,
sidewalk.
and much of it's in aesthetics, some of it's a functionality discussion. And so it comes back to opinion again, so. I put some pictures in there that I quite liked. There was one from Boise that had the garages separated. that didn't go over well with Tori, not to pick on her. And so all I'm pointing out is there's opinion there, and
Boise or that home, sorry.
well, I don't, maybe both, I don't know. But I've heard the same case made 20 years ago by somebody who built a duplex or twin home, actually. And that was the argument they made, is garages slammed together make great neighbors. Like fences make good neighbor,
Right.
make good neighbors. Their argument was,
Well,
well, if I don't want to see my neighbor, I just pull in and I don't have to hear them playing their saxophone or fighting or watching reruns of Seinfeld, because that garage provides that insulation.
unless their TV is in the garage.
There you go. And pool table, right?
But I think what you're not liking is you don't want the garages adjacent, sharing almost the same driveway.
Yeah.
Just a really wide driveway.
So what if instead of putting the garages on both ends, you just alternate them? Garage, house, garage, house.
That would be acceptable with all the
Because
stuff. Yeah.
the one downside to what we're showing here is now they're sharing a party wall and they hear each other. If you use the garage as a spacer, you make them more private.
Yeah, I can make the argument with all I said about aesthetics and functionality that would be acceptable.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to avoid just a facade of garages too, which is
Yes.
more likely in the townhomes than the twin homes, but alternating. Yeah, it's a great idea.
And actually, the wording of this, as it's written, would allow for what you described, Eric, the garage face.
It just says not adjacent, yeah.
Yep. We could leave that because it's an if statement, if you'd like, or.
Do we want to
modify
show
it.
both examples?
Change
On a
the-
picture?
We could get that changed. We
Yeah.
still have a little bit of dollars on that
Yeah,
contract.
If they're alternating garage, house, and they're not connected.
Well, they are connected.
Okay, how?
One of the garages is touching the other home. There's still a party wall.
I think that would be, well.
But I think noise transfer is diminished.
Okay, we have a contract for the folks that were doing the drawings, and as I recall, we haven't used up all their money yet. So we'll get another one.
Do we have an owner or rental stipulation on this one? Or we're just like,
The rental owner stipulation that we've put in the code is that the duplexes would be conditional uses and the twin homes would be permitted. And the difference there, twin homes are designed for ownership and duplexes are different category that allow for rental. So that's kind of the direction that we took from our last meeting. If you're wanting to say, hey, these need to be owned, then you probably ought to not allow duplexes.
What about long-term rental? What about a minimum 12-month rental?
That's
Add
something
that back
too.
in, sure.
Yeah.
I can see these will go for a lot of money.
Being
when ski
Airbnbs.
season.
Yeah.
Okay. So does that, am I hearing direction that that's a change everybody agrees to?
I think that somewhat accomplishes owner occupied on one side.
Yeah, probably does.
Well, let me ask you this statement. Let me ask you this question. Is it fair to just have a blanket statement on all these residential uses that they all have a 12-month minimum rental?
If they're rented?
I just pose that question because remember last week.
Well, I can tell you that on behalf of an HOA in this community, I would love to have had that in my CC.
I think there's some property types here that you wouldn't want to do that to. The flag lots being an example of that. If you're retired.
That they should be longer rentals or shorter?
No, I'm saying they should be able to use it if it's owner occupied, they should be able to use it as an Airbnb or.
that would be the
something like
ADU, not flag lot.
Why wouldn't it apply? I'm just saying that If the owner lives in that front house, so there's someone on premises making sure that rules are being followed and yards
Not
are
for
being
the
mowed.
flag lots. Those are all separate
Aren't
lots.
that way?
Yeah, because by definition, the flag lot would be a separate.
Yeah, they're all
lot.
separate.
Remind me, is the current city code, what's the current
So
city
that'd be an
code for
ADU then,
rentals?
or the
Yeah.
Short-term
SDU.
rentals.
So in the ADU situation, yeah.
No, SDU's owned.
External ADU or internal ADU, but SDU is a separate lot as well.
Yeah.
Because ADUs aren't covered in this?
So, well, we have another chapter on that, but yeah, they're at least in our chart.
In the chart.
Yeah, they're in the chart, but we have a separate chapter on those.
Yeah, we would apply it to everything but
What is the
those.
current?
On short-term rentals, as far as how long you can stay, the minimum? Well, there's not a minimum, but there's a maximum that relates to the tie to, I think it's when we start collecting transient room tax, I think that's 30 days. Not absolutely positive on that.
Well, I mean, the whole conversation, and this is probably the affordable housing conversation, really is if everybody's renting out short-term rentals, all the folks that need to work and live around here don't have any place to live.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying, blanket, if you rent, it must be a 1-year lease.
Yeah, and I don't know if you'd want to do that for duplexes nor the mansion styles, but I'm just saying
The
that.
mansion styles, I don't think you would at all, because those are specifically designed to be rentals.
Yeah, I mean, some stuff is just, that is going to be a rental, right? And you might try to do longer than the STR kind of stuff. And maybe that's a good way to go, but I think it's, again, another thing that's really hard to enforce, but.
But right now, if you say finish your basement and you use it as an Airbnb once in a while, that's already permitted, right?
Generally, yeah.
Because that's considered an ADU.
So you'd be doing the two things. You'd be creating an ADU, and then however you rent it would be subject to whatever we have in the STR ordinance, which I'm not familiar with, sorry. Short-term rental, sorry, or, sorry.
Is SDR
Jargon.
related to FDR? Not
And,
joke, too soon? Sorry.
okay.
It's getting too late.
It's almost 9, we're getting punchy.
Yep, okay, sorry. Okay, moving on. So think about that.
I think it's fair to say, can I just, it sounds to me as if it's fair to say, with a couple of exceptions, we're looking for these units to have long-term tenants.
Yeah.
I think that's what belongs downtown.
That's what we're
in
trying
this
to do.
overlay zone.
Because that'll make them, to me, while I appreciate somebody's ability to rent this, that, and the other, it actually means that somebody who works here will find a place to live and move and stay there, and not have to move out 6 months later when their rent goes up because they know they can charge more money to somebody else.
Yeah. So we could do that as a blanket thing for this zone, okay? I don't know if that means you got to do something to the STR ordinance, wherever that is, but you may need to. I just don't remember looking at it.
ADUs is where we would allow short-term rentals, which is what allows somebody to better afford their own, make their
Right.
situation more affordable, right?
And that falls into mansions as well. Okay.
And it has to be owner occupied, right?
Yeah,
There needs to be an
exactly.
owner living there.
Yeah.
If you want to buy an investment home and rent the whole thing out as a vacation property, that's great. That just doesn't belong in downtown, is essentially what we're saying.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in this overlay zone.
So it'd be at least a semi-blanket.
Yeah, it's a
Okay,
blanket for
a
this
holy
overlay
blanket.
zone, but it doesn't,
right.
the rest of the valley is still open to do other things.
And we could separate central from transition, but I don't think we want to.
Okay. We'll give that some more thought. Mansion style, a little bit different design criterion here. Again, this is for triplexes, fourplexes. These are not owner occupied. These would be the kind you see everywhere, except they won't look like the ones you see everywhere. It looks more like a single-family home. And so you have to choose from a list of about 10 items here. You have to have 4 of those in the actual design of the building. So the attempt here is just to make a triplex, fourplex fit in a little better. How's that?
Yeah, and that's in the transition zone, which is basically what's like allowing the one, what's it called? The senator, what is it?
Very similar to the senator, yeah, the
Congressman?
General, I don't know what it's called.
Talking about? We're talking about the senator down on Midway Lane.
Senator.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's what it's called.
It's essentially a hotel short-term rental situation, but it's only in the transition zone.
Yeah. I mean, you could put the longer term rental thing on this too.
For sure.
Um,
That takes it out of the neighborhood zone, the C and
It's
D.
in the transition area, yeah. Okay. So more thoughts there?
Does the senator work in this zone?
Works in the transit. Yeah, Midway
Since
Lane's
it's
transition,
a
right?
bed and breakfast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, bed and breakfasts are allowed in the underlying zone, R2 and R3.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then back to townhouses. I don't know why that particular graphic went dark, but it is fuzzy. Yeah, I don't know what happened to that one.
Graphic there.
Yeah, let me see what happened to that one. Townhouse graphic. Trying to move the units back and forth. I know that adds costs, but it also provides for a design feature that usually looks a lot better than a big, long, straight front. We're still limiting here to 5 attached, and you only have 2 foot, moving back and forth. But that's, again, a design thing worth having a conversation about. Open space requirement once you get into larger projects. And what else is in there? Yeah, there's not much actually in that is all that specific other than that design function there. Again, you got the 35 feet though, and a minimum of 20 feet wide. So, and we have balconies and patios required too, so people have an outside space. Okay. And then that next one's the courtyard one. That's all crossed out with my.
A quick question, could you go back up a bit to the separate utilities and easements? Ross, do you have any concerns? I know we generally had talked about getting some of your concerns in here. Is this building type get you a little more nervous or?
Scroll up just a little bit, Tony. I saw something that I thought was a little strange on one up from there. There was a number 9, and then right there, material, brick, stone, wood, cement, bottom materials, and metal accents. And then it seems like that means you have a period in another sentence.
Yeah, so we should put number 10 probably for utilities. That
Okay.
one's under the mansion style, so.
Okay.
Something seemed out there.
Oh, yeah, because what they're saying is if this is a mansion style house and you are wanting to turn that into a condominium, this is saying separate utilities are required in that, for each unit in that event.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Yep.
About that. Yeah, and we do have the general statement, which you ought to take another look at. That's further up there. Okay. Basically comes from what we did with the C3 zone. So, okay. What else? What else? Got rid of the courtyard one. Got my crossouts. Mixed-use buildings, very similar to what we have in the C3 zone, but not as many requirements. How's that? So, and that was all the easement discussions, public utility easements. Commercial buildings, again, very similar to what we have in the C3. So, and those are only in the TCD, the commercial and mixed use ones. Okay? Transition corridor one. Okay? Okay. I think that's, other than the drawing, that's pretty much the new stuff. Did we get the new map in there?
Yep, that's the correct map. Yep.
Okay, all
This
right.
has the addresses and the major streets that Tori asked for a while back.
Okay.
On the commercial buildings, it feels a little weird to have it in here, since so much of this is residential. So is this allowing us in the transition area only, is that correct?
Yes.
Now let's go back up to the table because there are limitations that we need to remind you about. So even though the commercial buildings are permitted in the TCD, you have to look at a couple of other tables because if you wanted to do a hotel and you're in the TCD or transitional, it says C note 1 below. So let's just say you're on 200 East. Well, it says for the TCD, that's only permitted only for properties fronting 100 South or 100 East and 100 West.
You're just trying to contain that to downtown, is that?
Yeah. So people are not able to do a commercial use on 200 East. It's just constrained to 100 East and 100 West, and the properties that front along there, as well as 100 South.
Do we even need to define what we mean by commercial uses?
Well, we do in the chart up here. The chart says what there are. Excuse me. So an artist studio doesn't have the limit of having to be on 100 East or West or 100 South because it doesn't have.
That's considered a commercial.
Yeah, that's a very light commercial one.
We're not talking big boxes. It says 5,000 square foot max, right?
Institutional and religious museums and public uses don't have that limitation, so they'd have more flexibility to locate off of 100 East and West and 100 South. Let's see, what else would we have? Yeah, so those are it. So yeah, if you're doing an office, a retail, or a service, or a secondhand store, you need to be off of, you need to be on those major streets, 100 West, East, or 100 South. And you're limited to 5,000 square feet.
It's kind of saying let's reduce the intensity as we get further out from downtown.
So limited to 35 feet high.
Yeah. Yeah.
But adapting, say, a existing home, I'm not going to use the word historic, to a bakery or cafe. Allowed in the TCD, but not in the central.
Well, that is a good, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the limits of a commercial building is it has to be a minimum of 2 stories.
Yeah.
Now, if it were a mixed-use building and somebody lived in it, that's just right above. So mixed-use building, page number, okay, you found it, number 9, page 9. You know, it's interesting. That could also be a live-work unit, right? If somebody wanted to take a bungalow and turn it into a bakery or cafe and live in the basement, wouldn't we be able to call that a mixed work use?
I think
live-work.
I think you probably can call a mixed use live work. I know the building code has some particular stuff for live work. We were going to put that in the historic building chapter because I think it's a limitation of what, 50% of the first floor, no more than 3,000 square feet, X number of employees, and something else. I forget all the little odds and ends, but the live work, again, not something I was familiar with until working in some other community. How's that?
Building code specifically addresses that now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're seeing a ton of it in urban redevelopment.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned for
Lane Lithgow's been
engineering.
doing it forever.
Ross, just a little concerned about
Lane Lithgow's place, they've been doing that forever there.
use building having adaptation that you're covering in terms of what would be equipment coming in this building to create business that would be compliant, not just for fire, but for your concerns.
So typically, if a building is going to be used for commercial use, they will have to get we'll have to do a review on impact fees. And so we'll know how many fixtures are going into it and whatnot. So they do have to go through us.
Okay.
So I don't know if we need to say anything.
Okay, I just want
to.
But all of these are going to go through you anyway,
Yeah,
right?
well.
Yeah. And we do have a front yard for those now too, right? In these zones.
Yeah, all buildings have to be
15 feet.
15-foot minimum, yeah.
One of the things that came up with the C3 zone was where's the public utility easement going? And it's easier to say, let's put it in the front yard than we're going right up to the street. And then it basically has to be in the street somewhere. So,
Well, and it kind of gives it kind of a less urban feel too
yeah,
by having that.
it does.
And it provides an area for dining, gathering.
Sure.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So, that's a good conversation we had tonight.
So, Tony, I don't think we've had any substantial changes here, right, John?
Not monstrous.
Couple little additions with the occupancy stuff, but
Okay.
that's about it.
Okay.
So you want me to read back the notes that I took? Or I don't know if that's helpful, but
Bring one more thing up that you might want to add.
Then let's wait for Derek. Go ahead.
I'm a tiny bit concerned about the 20-foot height limit on
In where?
in the smaller homes. That could be a little too restrictive.
Which one are we talking about?
Well, that'd be I think it's the SDUs, right?
Yeah, SDUs.
flag lots and SDUs have, a 20-foot min.
No, that even a one-story house could be 24-ish.
25 would be a good rule.
25 is a better rule for a one-story.
Yeah, I think you're really limiting roof pitch use and things by making it that low.
I think we need to have occupancy stipulations on townhomes in the C&D.
Could you expand on that?
At minimum, long-term rentals.
For the
So minimum
townhomes.
occupancy, you mean minimum duration of?
Yeah.
Just some sort of occupancy limitation, essentially not short-term rentals.
Are we going to do that as a blanket?
In the CN?
So there is some
Oh, yeah,
good
the
news.
blanket, yeah.
So the code that the city already has for short-term rentals already does that. So the short-term rental code that we have says that you cannot do a short-term rental in essentially attached housing. So no condos, no townhomes. Has to be a detached single-family dwelling. So we at least already have that protection in place.
Okay.
So I don't think, if you've wanted to do the long-term occupancy on a couple of the others, I don't see why we couldn't just add it here too.
Yeah, I was hoping globally with.
Are we just going to blanket the whole zone?
With
The
some
bold zone, yeah.
exceptions that
Yep.
these are providing opportunity through a minimum 12-month rental.
That makes that easy to put in there.
And the exceptions I thought were mansion homes and
ADUs.
or SDUs.
SDUs are a separate lot.
We don't need to do it for the SDUs because we're doing
Occupied as well.
permanent
Right.
ownership there.
Okay.
So just mansion homes would be the exception. Right? Duplexes
So,
are no longer term.
On my STU, I can rent it for less than like 2 weeks if I wanted to. That's what you're
ADU.
asking.
ADU. SDU's is owned.
The main
Separate
home is
lot.
owner occupied, but the STU,
No. So think of it as the main home is still there on its own
I
lot,
misunderstood.
and
Okay.
the SDU is on a separate lot there.
so we're directing towards the additional unit. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So the only one not covered in the blanket would be the mansion home.
Tony, wouldn't that be covered under your short-term rental because it shared walls already between the units?
Correct, yeah, it would,
So
yeah.
You couldn't exclude it.
You couldn't.
Because
Well, I think we're protected there because
That's what I'm
council has
saying.
said no short-term rental can be done in attached
Oh,
housing.
okay.
So that covers
What?
duplexes and
Sorry.
twin homes.
Yeah, so the short-term rental code says no short-term rental can be located in any attached type housing unit.
Like a townhome
Right.
Or a duplex.
or duplex. Okay.
So then the blanket, we'll just put it in here anyway, even though it's already covered for that one.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I like that. Ross first and then you second. Go.
If I'm understanding correctly, mansion style can be done by either apartment or.
Let's get rid of that word.
Is that correct?
Let's get rid of that word. How's
But
that?
that's a question.
Apartment/condo.
Okay, that'd be fine.
All right, we'll go the latter. So it's apartment/condo. Ken?
Just a quick question, right? You went way past it on the accessory dwelling units and the supportive dwelling units. In the transition corridor zone, I'm kind of confused. If you have an internal accessory dwelling unit, then it's one utility hookup. You're going to require a second utility hookups for a accessory dwelling unit behind or a subordinate dwelling unit behind. I want to hit this from an affordable standpoint. What's the feeling on that?
Well, the SGU would have separate, 100%. Yeah, I have seen detached ADUs somehow hooking into the regular home, but
So Ross, if I'm not mistaken, every owner occupied type housing has to have a separate utility to each unit.
So how I interpret that, Tony, is if it's a parcel of record, then yes, it needs to have its own utilities. So if I can see a situation where you've got a home and an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, they're on one lot of record.
One lot.
I can
At the home, you
see
don't need
that use the same utility.
Okay.
If it's, so if
SDU is its own lot.
over there at the county, if it's got a legal lot of record, it needs to have its own utility.
Okay.
Right, but if it's an internal ADU, it doesn't need a separate.
Right.
It's part of the home.
right.
Okay. Okay. Did that answer your question?
If it's a separate dwelling unit behind on a legal parcel,
Yes.
then one utility serves that. So they're not paying a second hookup, utility fees, and so forth for an ADU or a subordinate dwelling unit.
Right.
In this transition corridor.
Well, the subordinate dwelling unit has its own lot though.
Yeah, subordinate and ADU are not the same.
Separate the lot.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
And it would have its own utilities.
But an accessory dwelling unit where it's all under one ownership does not require.
Right.
Right. I mean, I don't think it throws out the option of doing your own, doing separate,
Right, you
but
could still do
you
your
could
own,
do the
but I
separate.
think we would look at that as it could be done with one service.
Yeah.
And our fire department's okay with that?
Excuse me?
I just asking in general, is the fire department okay with that?
As far as service goes, we're talking water and sewer. I think that's the question on the table. We're talking water and sewer.
Yeah.
Power, gas.
Right. I mean, if it was all under one service, the other is back. That was my question.
Well, so it depends on how you're paying for it, because it would have to, if you're somebody else is living there, then your power bill, you know, like power bill, like separating. So they know how much power they're using.
But that's not required, that's not required.
An owner should put an owner-owned meter on it, that's not a problem.
But if it comes in front of the engineer's office, we're going to be saying, if that's on home parcel of record.
Yeah, then it needs its own, yeah. That's clear.
Like Phil said, or Commissioner Chairman Johnson, Jordan, sorry, said if somebody wants to do two separate services to one parcel of record, an ADU and a house, they can certainly do that.
Yeah. Okay, let's rally this up then. So why don't you read through your changes?
Okay.
Let me just, hold on one second. Dennis, are you there? Hello, Dennis Gunn. I see you're with us. I'm wondering if you're really, because we're going to get ready to actually do something.
Yes.
Great,
I am
thanks.
just trying to get to the unmute button.
No worries. We're going to rally up here and get something done. Go ahead.
Okay, page 3, we're changing the maximum height for for flag lots and SDUs from 20 feet to 25 feet. The next change on that page is we're putting a long-term rental occupancy limit on most of the residential type units on here, with the exception of mansion-style apartments and
No, we're not excluding the mansions because you already got those covered with SDR.
Okay. So
But
long-term.
I think that should go in those general ones before
In the general,
this.
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll put that in general.
I agree.
Okay, better idea. Okay, next change is with the SDU, you're taking out the 300 square foot minimum footprint for an SDU. On the duplexes and twin homes, we're putting in a new pick that shows the ability to have garage living instead of the big spread.
That's preferred, yes.
Okay. Adding, on all the pictures, we'll make sure that they're higher quality, but in particular, the one on townhouses, we're going to add a number 10 for separate utilities that Ross brought up on that page. That's all the notes that I took.
And you have that mansion style apartment / condo on this chart.
Condo on the chart, yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep, I got that.
Okay.
Okay, any comments from our subject matter experts? Are we good? John, are you feeling good?
I'm not going to drag this out. I like the changes. I love what you've done. I'd love at some point in the future to look at those design standards. When you're trying to build affordable, all those things really do matter.
Yeah.
So for right now, that's great. This is a great step forward. I would just suggest that in the future, maybe suggesting that staff look at, maybe an affordable overlay that would take away some of those design requirements in the future, but not right now.
I'm sure if Dave were here, we'd like to talk about that. Dave Richards. Derek, you're the alternate on that subject.
I hate ugly.
We hate expensive. In this case, missing middle needs to be cheap. Okay, anything else? No. Anything from you? You good? Great. Tony, you good?
Yes, sir.
All right, anything from the commissioners? Hearing none. Dennis, you out there? Any questions, concerns?
No, I think it looks good to me.
Okay. We're ready for a motion. Who would like to make a motion?
Can I make a motion and just say all of the changes that Tony mentioned?
That's correct.
I move to recommend approval of the CHOZ as per revisions currently in red and that we just discussed.
Awesome.
second
That's
that.
sufficient? We have a second from ex officio, or our recently passed chair, Mr. Dennis, Commissioner
I'm
Dennis.
still around. I haven't
You're
passed.
still here. I know. Okay, we have a chair. We have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please recognize by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody in opposition, say nay. Awesome job, everybody. Unanimous. Well done.
Great work. Nice
Well
job,
done.
Jay. And staff, excellent. And planning commission, wonderful job. Good work.
Yeah, Tony, just A+ gold star. Thank you very much. And John as well. And now, yes, comment from Commissioner McKinley.
One of the consequences of what we're doing is we're increasing the density. And it seems to me that it would make some sense to review all of our parking statutes just to make sure that we're dealing with a lot of the issues that some of the residents have already talked about. This doesn't really deal with those, and it's going to exacerbate the situation, I'm afraid. I mean, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but I think that a review of those parking ordinances might be of benefit.
Excellent call.
Under disclosure, Tony and I had a conversation about that and sort of getting ready for this final meeting, and I had recommended there are reasons why some communities have permitted overnight parking in residential areas. So that might be a consideration that would allow for people to feel as if they're coming home from work at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. They're not having to go 17 blocks away from their home to be able to park, especially in the wintertime. So although on-street parking in Heber City is not allowed during the winter from November through April.
Yeah, the city's going to have to become more sophisticated with how it looks at parking. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
One of the things that the city's going to be looking at is doing a parking district in the downtown. It's not the whole area. It'll probably be 7 or 8 blocks long, maybe even the full 11 blocks from 5th North to 6th South by about 2 blocks on each side. And I think over time, we are going to have to, in that higher density area, have different parking regulations than we have throughout the rest of town. It's an area where the council has talked about doing parking fee in lieu, where a developer or property owner could pay into a fund instead of providing parking. It's an area where we could maybe have overnight, eventually different types of fees and regulations. So we're actually having those conversations as we speak with council right now. So
I can only speak from my experience having lived in other larger cities that the overnight parking is a pretty useful solution that's easy to enforce, and it doesn't require anything other than having a permit in your window of your car.
Interesting.
And if you don't have one, you get a whopping big ticket, like $50 to $100 ticket, and you do it once and you don't park there anymore. And then when you come home, you can park next to your home.
It is a big irritant to tourists, however.
It is a very big irritant to tourists, but there you go. Any other questions before the commission today? So we have been through already a public hearing process on the CHOZ. We had the outdoor work, we had the workshop, and then we also had another public hearing following that. And I don't think there's anything that has substantially changed here, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think we've taken into account a lot of the
Yeah,
comments.
I think we're in the weeds, and I'm not certain the public would ultimately have an understanding of that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. I think we're adjourned. Do I have a motion, please?
Oh, so moved.
So moved.
Okay, we have a second? Second? Thank you. We have a second. We have no motion. Any discussion? No, we don't. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dennis.
This conference is no longer being recorded. This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded. This conference is no longer being recorded.